Okay, it just changed to 9 o'clock, so I want to welcome everybody to our 2022 lethal viral necrosis update. My name is Laurie Albrecht. I'm an extension agent here in Palm Beach County, and this presentation is brought to you by the folks at the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. So if you hear us say this acronym IFAS, that's what we're talking about, the university and the portion of the university that deals with our agricultural sciences and other issues, food sciences also. So this is also put on by Palm Beach County Extension and also by Miami-Dade Extension. These are two of our counties here in South Florida that have been heavily impacted by the disease. So my colleague, Henry Mayer, will also be presenting and talking. And of course, we brought together the specialists from the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences to bring you the best and updated information. With that, I am going to turn the presentation over to Dr. Phil Harmon. Dr. Phil Harmon is a professor of plant pathology with the University of Florida, and he has been dealing with this disease since it's first been diagnosed, and even before, when we were looking at what is causing these symptoms that we're seeing. So he has a lot of experience, probably more experience than he would wish with this disease. I'm turning it over now to Dr. Harmon.
All right, thank you, Laurie, and good morning, everyone. Are you able to see the slides there, Laurie?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. So thank you goes out to Laurie and Henry and all those who have helped to put this meeting together. This has been a big effort for them to organize everything and give us an opportunity to put the best information out about a challenging turfgrass disease that's affecting many lawns in the state of Florida, particularly, as Laurie mentioned, in Palm Beach and southern counties. So my name is Phil Harmon. I'm an extension specialist. I'm a professor at the University of Florida in Gainesville, where this morning it was 37 degrees at my house, pretty chilly. And I'm going to be presenting some research and some up-to-date information that came from a collaboration with my colleague, Dr. Jane Polston, who's retired. She's a virologist. And so without further ado, let's jump into lethal viral necrosis. Okay, so first I want to give you an overview of what I'm going to present today. I have a lot of slides to go through, a lot of information, hopefully that will answer many questions you have about Mosaic, sugarcane mosaic virus, and lethal viral necrosis. I'll go through what the history of these diseases are and how they have affected turfgrass within the state. I'll talk about the research that's been done within the last 8 or 9 years since this new variant that's causing a lethal response in Floratam was first discovered. So we'll talk about the research that's been done. And then importantly, we'll go through some management options, what we know works, what we can expect from new infections spreading through our counties and through our communities, and talk about some things that we can do to slow that spread and to deal with it when it does occur in our areas. So viruses affect plants, people, animals, etc. We have viruses that affect turfgrass, and prior to lethal viral necrosis in about 2014-13, we really didn't pay them much attention because they didn't cause us any economic impact. They didn't cause us major issues within our lawns. As far as St. Augustinegrass goes, we have known for a long time that there is a virus called sugarcane mosaic virus. It's abbreviated SCMV. It can infect St. Augustinegrass. It causes a very mild symptom called a mosaic. The disease name is also Mosaic, and this is in a group of viruses that affect potato and tomato and other groups called the Podiviridae. So this is a virus in a known group that has affected St. Augustinegrass for a long time, and it can also infect Bermuda grass, some paspalum grasses, crab grasses, and other weedy and ornamental grasses that we have in our lawns. It has not been very problematic up until 2013. But it was out there. It was published first in the 50s or 60s as causing a problem. Now, the issue that Mosaic causes, the symptom on the plant that you might find if you get down on your hands and knees and look for these yellowing grass blades are broken, irregular lines of yellow discoloration within the leaf blade. So this is different from a nutrient stress type symptom in that the lines are irregular. They don't run the entire length of the leaf blade like you can see in this picture here. They're broken, and they represent a symptom that is characteristic of viral infection of grass. If you look at a lawn with SCMV, you will understand why this has not been an issue that's been talked about or worried about for the last 50 years or so. This lawn is infected with sugarcane mosaic virus and has sugarcane mosaic virus and mosaic disease. Now, it looks pretty good, and the homeowner is not likely to be concerned about this because you really would have to get down on your hands and knees like I did to look through this grass and find the individual yellow leaf blades that are showing the symptom of the disease. So it's out there. It has been in the Florida landscapes and Florida crops like sugarcane and corn, but it hasn't caused a lot of issues for us in St. Augustine grass. When you do look for that symptom in the grass that's affected, the thing that we saw for the first 50 years we've known about this problem was this mosaic symptom. Again, a light green and a dark green broken pattern on the grass blades. Not every blade is affected. These are little patches of turf that will become symptomatic throughout the year. They don't progress any further than that when we have mosaic disease. So not something that we're particularly concerned about. If the grass is extremely stressed, we can sometimes see larger areas of the blade become yellow versus dark green. This will happen on a few individual clumps of grass within the lawn. Again, not something that we're particularly worried about. It can be found if you're looking for it. It's not something that you're going to be concerned about as far as the aesthetic quality of your lawn. Now, the different problem that we're going to talk about today is lethal viral necrosis, also caused by sugarcane mosaic virus, but a different strain and causes much different symptoms. So we have known since the 1960s that this mosaic is in rural Palm Beach County. It affects sugarcane. As I mentioned, it can go into in ditch banks is where it was first found, where they used to graze cattle on St. Augustine grass. That grass showed infection. The pathologist published that back in the 1960s, that it was mosaic disease, but there was never any death of turf grass associated with sugarcane mosaic virus in St. Augustine grass prior to 2013. So it was out there, it wasn't doing much. No one really worried too much about it or paid it much attention. The new symptoms that we're talking about today are very different. They've been called lethal viral necrosis because the symptoms progress beyond this yellowing. They spread much more rapidly through a lawn, and they result in the death of Floratam St. Augustine grass, a grass that you'll hear a lot about today and that is most heavily affected by this lethal viral necrosis. So instead of a yellow, spotty little bit of distribution through a lawn, we have lawns that are dying, causing bare patches, weeds, etc. So this is a concern, an aesthetic problem for us in the lawns. And unfortunately, it's become common in some areas where it's been introduced, and continues to spread throughout the state. So what happens with lethal viral necrosis is you first get the same symptoms of mosaic. They have the yellow leaf blades with the broken lines of discoloration. The difference is with lethal viral necrosis, that yellowing transitions from a yellow color to a brown necrosis or death of the plant material. So here's a turf grass shoot that has been exposed to a cooler temperature. 65 degrees Fahrenheit is about what it needs for the transition to occur between the yellowing to the browning and death of the Floratam lawn. Now here is right after the cool temperature exposure, the transition. You can see some of these blades still have the yellow discoloration or broken lines. Others have already started to progress to the necrosis, the death of the turf. The death of that turf becomes more severe as the year goes on and the winter goes on. And it can progress from the oldest leaf blades then up to the newest leaf blade until it essentially kills the grass that it's infected. And it moves along the stems of the grass that are above ground called stolons and affects one piece of grass to the next, and then one piece of grass in the lawn through to the rest of the lawn. This is kind of the end point of what happens as the turf continues to die. The virus is systemic, and so it moves throughout the plant, and the entire plant becomes necrotic and then dies. So in this picture, we have a Floratam lawn. You'll see that there's some weedy grasses like Bermuda grass and crabgrass that are growing in here. The Floratam has died because of lethal viral necrosis. Now, viruses don't typically kill all of their hosts in any one infection, and that's the case here as well. You get 2 or 3% of St. Augustine grass that will survive. And it's important to note that the other grasses don't die. They get the virus, they can maintain the virus and reproduce it, but they have mild mosaic symptoms like our other varieties of St. Augustine grass and like Floratam got prior to 2013. So the issue here is that we have grass that is very common within the state of Florida. We have grass that's very severely affected, and we have a endpoint here of grass which is not an acceptable quality for turf grass for most of us in the state. So the early days of the discovery of the lethal viral necrosis led us to ask many questions, some of which we still don't have the answers for. But the observations that we've made have helped us to understand what's going on with the disease and develop management recommendations that I'll share with you today. One of the first things that we saw in Pinellas County was that grasses that were not Floratam could become infected, but that did not die. And lawns that died that were replaced with Floratam died a second and a third year. If they were replaced with the Floratam grass, as this section of sod and this section of sod was, that sod is not successful. It will die the following year, meaning that that investment made for that sod product that was installed was wasted and had to be done again and again. And we didn't know why in the early days, which was very troublesome, costly, and the reason why we got on this problem and did the research that we did to determine that this lethal viral necrosis is caused by sugarcane mosaic virus, and it's specific to the Floratam genetics of St. Augustine grass, that one variety so far, Floratam. Where we have palmetto or other grasses that were installed, they become sick, but they don't die. They present an acceptable lawn. Here's another example of sod that was placed down in a lawn that died from lethal viral necrosis. The grass has become infected much more rapidly on the reinstall and has failed the following year after the initial installation that went well. Grass looked like it was taking fine. The virus remains in the landscape in those weedy grasses and surrounding grasses around the lawn, and quickly moves back in and affects the sod that's placed down if it's Floratam sod. So what's the status of lethal viral necrosis? It is not a formal published disease name. It's a new thing that we are still researching. We call it a syndrome because it has not been published in a peer-reviewed journal as this is exactly what causes it. It's something that we're still learning about. It's something that we've made a great deal of progress on, but that is the subject of current research. What we do know is that 100% of the samples that have the lethal viral necrosis test positive for sugarcane mosaic virus. There's a very tight association. We've done inoculations with the virus and we can cause the symptoms. We're still not to the point of publishing that peer review. It takes time for that sort of thing to go, but it doesn't mean we can't come up with good management recommendations based on the best information we have in the meantime, which is what we're presenting today. Let's talk a little bit about the distribution of the lethal viral necrosis. Now, it's important to distinguish between lethal viral necrosis and sugarcane mosaic virus. The virus that causes it is distributed throughout the southern United States, all the way up into Ohio and the Midwest. The lethal viral necrosis was initially found in Pinellas County in 2013. Hundreds of lawns were affected before we finally, found out what it was and we had a test that we could do to determine and show that the sugarcane mosaic virus was causing it. Very next year, an outbreak that had probably been going on for a couple of years in Palm Beach County was confirmed in 2014, and it spread across the county from neighborhood to neighborhood, not uniformly, sporadically from community to community, and then it spread out from Palm Beach County, both north and south, from 2014 up until last year, where it has reached the Glades County, Collier County, and Fort Myers and Lee County. So it has spread down through the Keys, it's spread up through Vero Beach, and we've had detections and confirmation of lethal viral necrosis from all of these counties. That doesn't mean that every community within the county is affected, certainly not. It's sporadic as to what communities are affected. We'll talk more about the distribution and why that is moving forward. In the next slide, you'll see a map of distribution. You'll see up in the northern part of the state, Clay and Columbia County are positive for SCMV, one sample each. When we go out and look for it, we can find it. It's not the strain that causes LVN, and it's not the symptom LVN of death. It's the mosaic that we know has been around for a long time. So here we can see the map from Vero Beach down through the Keys. We found it in the Florida Keys, all the way up now through Fort Myers. Pinellas County has spread throughout the county. The virus and the LVN symptom is present from the southern tip all the way up through the northernmost parts of the county, but it hasn't jumped from county to county into Hillsborough or neighboring counties that we know of, like it has from Palm Beach County. Reason why we're not sure probably has to do with environment and the favorability of this environment for spread and the development of the disease, but that's subject for ongoing research. So how fast does it spread? The rate of the spread of the virus and the LVN problem varies by scale, depending on the scale that you're talking or asking about, and then the types of lawns that we see. So when we look at the county to county spread, it's been relatively slow. We've had spread over the last 8 or 9 years that has moved around the southern tip of the state. But again, it's been fairly slow in Pinellas County to move anywhere out of there. There may be a northern limit to which LVN occurs. That's something that we're going to have to wait and see and continue to monitor for disease in those areas. When we talk about community to community spread, it's been very erratic. We know that we have some nearby communities in Palm Beach County that have very similar lawn situations with very high quality monogenic establishments of Floratam that look great next to communities that are suffering from LVN and have been suffering for a number of years. I think the number of those lawns and communities that have not experienced continues to decline. We continue to see spread within the counties, particularly Palm Beach and Pinellas, where it's been there for a while, but it's been erratic and difficult to predict in the kind of a non-linear fashion, one community to the next, which will be affected and how severely. So and that causes some frustration because you look at your neighboring community and there may not be the same level of death and destruction that you're seeing and experiencing in yours. And the next question becomes, why? And again, those are questions we're continuing to ask with research. If we talk about lawn-to-lawn spread, the spread of the virus occurs fairly quickly, and we'll talk about mechanisms for spreading the virus. The difficult part to kind of wrap our heads around is that the virus spreads out in front of obvious symptoms. What I mean by that is when we find a lawn that's infected, chances are very good that the lawns 2 or 3 on either side are already infected but not yet showing symptoms. They have the virus, but they're not showing symptoms. What that means is that when we try to stop it, we're always behind 2 or 3 lawns from trying to get that to occur. Within the lawn, we see a more typical progression occur from lawn to lawn, and that usually involves the following. The first detection is in year 1. We'll see localized patches of bronzing turf or turf that's starting to die with no fungal cause, no disease issue other than sugarcane mosaic virus, which is confirmed, and then an LVN diagnosis given. In year 2, the patches tend to expand. You'll see more patches within the lawn that's affected. You'll see those grow in size and usually grow together. And then you'll start to see weeds invading in year 2. You'll see Bermuda-grass weeds, and you'll see other broadleaf weeds that we haven't had problems with in the past because the Floratam is an excellent competitor against weeds. When it's sick and suffering from LVN, it dies out and we see weed problems. By year 3, we generally see widespread loss of Floratam in those first affected lawns, and those lawns have spread the virus out from that initial detection into many lawns on either side. If we're talking about a street where we have neighboring lawns, it will spread fairly quickly within lawn and lawn to lawn in those types of communities where we have lawns that are connected and that are all Floratam genetics and grasses. What about the types of lawn and how that affects the spread? Unfortunately, our highest quality, best lawns in the state of Florida are the ones most severely affected. The high quality monocultures of Floratam that are very well maintained and that are very healthy and dense, lush growth of the Floratam St. Augustinegrass are hardest hit. Those are the ones that all of the grass in that lawn are susceptible. When they become infected, those are the ones where all of that grass dies. If we have mixtures of grasses, we see less dramatic spread, less dramatic symptoms. And it's important to note that this LVN spread occurs and becomes apparent at one time of the year when we start to see lower temperatures occur, usually in the October, November timeframe, and then they progress throughout the cool winter season. In the summertime, the grass that wasn't killed will make a slight recovery. We can see weeds and other grasses growing in, but then in that following year, when the cool temperatures return, we see the disease occurring again. So when communities detect the virus and LVN is diagnosed from their lawns, one of the first questions they ask is, what will happen in my community? What's going to happen in my lawn, in my neighbor's lawn? What should we do about it? What will happen? And Yogi Berra has a lot of good quotes that I like to use from time to time. And it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future when we're talking about biological organisms and disease that occurs. It's tough to say for sure. What we go on is what we know has happened in other communities in similar situations. And it's not always 100% prediction correct of what will happen. But we have a lot of data now for many communities have been through this. And so we're pushing that information out through our county faculty. They've done a great job for us in helping folks understand what to expect. Okay, so how do we get to this point so far that we know lethal viral necrosis is caused by this virus? I'm not going to go into great detail in the research that we did. We did do genetic research. We isolated viruses from these affected lawns. The first round of research collected, 89 samples from lawns in Pinellas and Palm Beach County. We used a technology called Illumina, which is a next generation sequencing research that basically takes viruses out of the plants, sequences those viruses, and allows us to compare the sequence or the genetic code of the virus to other known virus codes. And we found that we had sugarcane mosaic virus present in all of the samples that had this lethal viral necrosis and mosaic. There was a second virus initially identified in that round of research as well. Later validation steps where we took that research and tried to confirm what it meant, showed SCMV was playing primary and critical role. Second virus was not. And so we've excluded that now. It simplifies the story. It doesn't necessarily change the management options or abilities all that much. In the second research project, we took the virus back into the greenhouse. We put it into St. Augustinegrass, and we then evaluated what varieties could we recommend to replace lawns that have died and that continue to die when they're replaced with Floratam St. Augustinegrass. So to do that, we took the virus and put it into corn, a much larger grass that produces a lot more virus that we could extract from the corn, and then inoculate St. Augustinegrass from different sod farms and different varieties. And what we found was that when we introduced this virus, inoculated it into Floratam, we got mosaic. When we took those mosaic plants and put them at 64 degrees Fahrenheit for an extended period in an incubator, like you see here, the mosaic progressed from the yellowing that's of not much concern to the death of the grass, the lethal viral necrosis that is of concern and that we're seeing in the landscape. So it followed our observations. We confirmed that sugarcane mosaic virus was a part of that and was causing that. And we were able to replicate it from healthy Floratam from 2 of 3 sod farms that provided us with grass for us to use for this research. So if you take a look here, you'll see Floratam from farm A, B, and C, and then some other varieties that we were testing. This is the number of pots of grass that we tested, somewhere between 5 and 8, 3 and 8. And then we put those grasses after they started to show mosaic symptoms at 64 Fahrenheit. 2 of the 3 Floratams showed necrosis or the lethal viral necrosis symptom, as did the sample we collected from Pinellas County in the summer that we grew alongside these. The one interesting thing here is Floratam from farm C didn't die, which meant either we didn't have Floratam or something else was going on here. As it turns out, we had to do additional research to try to determine which it was. Dr. Kevin Kenworthy will be talking later about some challenges with variety genetic purity and some sampling efforts, both from landscapes and sod farms, that have helped us to understand what these sod products are as far as plant genetics are concerned and how we can make our recommendations, ensure that the Floratam that we see and that we know is susceptible is not used to resod these lawns that are affected. It's an excellent grass. Floratam is a great variety. It's very popular because it's so good, but it also dies from this disease and is not an option when we have lost Floratam due to the virus, as I'll talk about moving forward. Additional research was done in 2020 where we sampled the lawns from Boynton Beach to try to get to the bottom of why we saw some lawns fail after installation of what was supposed to be other varieties, bitter blue being one of the notable examples here. From this research, we took samples from 47 different lawns and communities in Palm Beach County and Boynton Beach area. And Dr. Kenworthy will talk about his efforts in genotyping those individual stolons or individual plants that were in this sod that was purchased and installed. And essentially, we collected grass that had the lethal viral necrosis, that had mosaic, or that didn't have any symptoms at all, but were planted within some of these lawns that were affected. And what we found was what we expected, but not necessarily as advertised what was installed. In other words, the samples came from lawns that were reported to have been installed with bitter blue, citra blue, palmetto, or unknown. And what we found was that even though some of those lawns installed and marketed as bitter blue died from LVN, and genetically they were Floratam. So there was a mixture of genotypes within some of that sod product. And as it turns out, it's very difficult to tell for researchers, for sod growers, for installers, what the genetic makeup of a sod product is when it's sitting on a pallet or even when it's out on a farm. We continue to see a 100% association also with mosaic being associated with palmetto, citra blue, Raleigh, and other genotypes. When it was one of these genotypes, in the bottom list here, the grass did not die. It developed mosaic, but it served as a functional lawn in the areas affected by LVM. Floratam, when it was Floratam, no matter what it was called, died and had to be replaced again. We took additional research steps here with a second round of sequencing from these samples, found that sugarcane mosaic virus indeed continues to be 100% associated with LVN and mosaic. It was not found in asymptomatic Floratam, and the second virus that we'd initially identified was not found in this round of sampling from 2020, meaning that we had symptoms of LVN with SCMV, no Bermuda grass latent virus. It's a single virus issue at this point that, again, we need to do additional research on. So in talking about the management of this problem, we need to understand a little bit about viruses and how they work in plants. The virus multiplies inside diseased plants. It has to have that host for it to survive and to do its life cycle and to multiply itself. It can't do it outside of the plant. The virus has to spread in moist plant sap. So that moist plant sap of the infected plant has to be transferred into a new plant, be spread, and to have that virus take hold and cause disease. The virus doesn't survive very long outside the plant. So as that plant sap dies and dries, the virus dies and becomes non-infected. So it also does not affect palms, ornamental plants, pets, people, or wildlife. So thankfully, we don't have to worry about there being any problem for our pets, for our children, for ourselves, and going out in these lawns, even though they look very drastic and dramatic in the amount of death that occurs. It's not a threat to people, pets, or wildlife, just to the grasses. And so far, it only kills Floratam and very, very closely related Floratam varieties. So these are things that we need to understand about the virus and about plant viruses in order to come up with management options. So we know that moist plant sap is something that occurs during normal mowing practices. When we mow, we free up moist plant sap. When we cut those leaf blades and grind them up. And we know that in our research, that's how we transfer the virus from plant to plant. We grind up those plant leaves that are infected, and then we smash them into new grass to get the virus to take. And that's what mowers are doing when we move from lawn to lawn and across the lawn. They're taking that moist plant sap and introducing it into healthy tissue. So within a lawn, what can we do? We can avoid mowing from diseased areas into healthy areas, try to mow the healthy areas first. That'll reduce the chances of the virus moving into non-diseased areas, but it won't stop it. It's something that we can do to try to slow it down a little bit. We want to try to avoid moving fresh material on mowers because that's a way that we can move the virus from place to place. So in the management of this, we want to try to limit our movement of it and limit the inoculation of healthy areas. So in order to do that, we've been recommending folks allow plenty of time for that plant sap on equipment like mowers or string trimmers to dry before changing accounts, whether that's lawn to lawn or community to community, and remove the material from the equipment on site. Don't carry it from place to place. There's no reason that it needs to be removed and discarded in any particular fashion. If it's there, return it back and allow it to help the turf continue to grow. Questions that we get on management. Okay, now we know mowers can spread this, whether it's the homeowner, a company, or anyone else using that mower, it doesn't matter. Can it be sanitized? Can we get the virus and remove it from the mower? And yes, that's a possibility. We can kill virus. We know how to do that pretty well now. As far as sanitizing equipment between accounts or between moving from place to place, it makes some sense to reduce the chance of introducing the virus into a new community or a new lawn. But so far, when we've used these steps within a community, it hasn't stopped the spread. So again, this is something that can help to slow it down, but it's not going to prevent from one neighbor spreading the disease down the community street to other lawns. So as far as sanitizers we can use when we're using and moving equipment from place to place, household bleach works very well, but it's corrosive to metal in our equipment. There are commercial sanitizers. We have to be careful about how we use these and where the runoff goes. We can't wash them down, sanitizers down storm drains, etc. So there are some commercial sanitizers that allow for application, wetting the material, allow it to dry. Virkon S is one that works very well for killing viruses. It has not been particularly effective, again, at stopping the spread of sugarcane mosaic virus. It may slow it down. Green Shield, Pine Sol, various other products, if they're used according to their label, can indeed kill the virus, but have had limited usefulness as far as preventing spread from place to place. And we'll talk about why that is in just a moment. Because it's not spread in irrigation water, the virus is not spread in soil, or it's not spread airborne. The virus has to be in the plant or in the vector. An insect vector is another way that it can move. Or an arthropod vector. In this case, we know that aphids can spread this group of viruses. We know that aphids are occasional feeders on St. Augustinegrass, and we know that this is one way that this virus can be spread from one lawn, jump a few communities, and then land in another lawn. These aphids can fly, but they're not common pests of St. Augustinegrass, and they don't fly very well. So the spread has been erratic. It's been slow, relatively slow from community to community, and dependent on these little tiny aphids feeding on infected lawns and then moving into healthy lawns and feeding while they still maintain the virus. Okay, moving on now from what can we do to stop it? Essentially what I've said is there's not any way to stop this thing once it's introduced into a community. The virus continues to spread. So what can we do about it? LVN killed my lawn, now what? First thing we want to recognize is we don't want to regrass with Floratam. And we know from our research that Floratam is present in sod marketed as Floratam, as well as some other sod products that are not necessarily marketed as Floratam, but that contain, again, Floratam genetics, and Floratam grass is a mixture. Those that have Floratam that are used will die a second time, have to be replaced again, resulting in additional costs and problems. There are two varieties currently that we're looking at and continuing to recommend. Palmetto is an established variety. It's been around for a long time. It's one that we're recommending because it does not die from the virus. And it is produced by licensed growers with the company Sod Solutions. Because they have this licensing process, there is a pretty high genetic integrity within grass produced by these licensed producers. If you buy palmetto from a licensed palmetto producer, we have found, and Dr. Kenworthy will talk more about this, that chances are very high you will get palmetto in what you purchase. The other grass that we're cautiously optimistic about is a new UF variety called Citrablue. So far, it has not died either. It can produce a very good lawn. It's resistant to some other fungal diseases as well, which is nice. But it is new and something that we're cautiously optimistic and recommending folks try out in smaller areas first and then move forward with. So far, it's done very well. It's not perfect, has issues like palmetto does, but it's been a good solution for LVN affected communities, and one that we continue to recommend folks try. And then following reinstallation, we have to keep in mind that the virus is one reason why lawns can fail, but there are many others, and we have to follow the best management practices for renovating a St. Augustinegrass lawn. Dr. Unruh will be on the call later today, and will go into what some of those steps are for reestablishing a lawn after you have a failure. Timing of grass replacement. We get a lot of questions from HOAs, from individuals about what should we do? Now we have this in our community. Do we have to replace all the grass right now? Can we wait and not replace any of it and let it go and see what happens? And the strategies are really personal in the decisions that are made by the individual or the HOA. There's no right or wrong answer here, I don't think. And what we try to do is to provide the best information for what are the likely outcomes for these different strategies. And they vary from communities that have decided to go with a wall-to-wall replacement, which is pretty extreme in one direction, or allow the lawns to die, become unsightly, and then individually replace them piecemeal. And it boils down to aesthetics. Luckily, we're not talking about life or death of any humans, animals, etc. These are lawn grasses, very important to us, obviously, but not a human health issue, an aesthetic issue that it boils down to the individual person and HOA and their tolerance for poor-looking grass. So far, what we have found and what we can relay is that no strategy, whether it's wall-to-wall or piecemeal changing, has halted progression or saved neighboring Floratam lawns. Once it's introduced into the communities, it has spread from lawn to lawn, and has infected and eventually killed or is in the process of killing the Floratam lawns that are there connected within those communities. No remediation as far as what we can do about replacing that grass and steps we can take during that effort has allowed the Floratam to be used as a replacement sod after the lawn died from LVN. LVN killed my lawn. There's nothing we can do as far as fumigation. We've had folks that have removed soil and brought in fresh soil, built fences, etc. The lawn has died a second time when Floratam is used. So highly discourage folks from doing that. It has not so far worked, no matter what level of intense management we do on that Floratam grass in that second installation. As I mentioned earlier, the lawns resodded with palmetto in Pinellas County from the initial 2013 detections are doing well. They have the virus. The virus is present, but the symptoms are mild and the homeowners are generally happy with the quality of the lawn. This palmetto lawn has to be maintained. It has to be maintained at even a slightly higher level than Floratam because it is a little more susceptible to some fungal diseases, but it can be maintained as a high quality lawn. When we see Floratam put back, this is the sort of thing that we see. It dies 95 to 97%, sometimes a little higher, of the sod will die much more quickly than that 3-year initial spread throughout the lawn. So the virus remains in the neighbors' lawns, it remains in the lawn and weeds and live plant material, and Floratam has not been able to be used to replace those. As far as the summary, what we're telling landscape maintenance folks is, try to keep the virus out of your accounts. And to do that, you can take precautions to try to prevent disease transmission on equipment. Don't mow grass that is wet plant sap has live virus that can move the disease. Dried plant sap doesn't. Drying grass before you mow it, allowing it to dry, can limit that likelihood of disease being spread. Sanitize between accounts and communities where you're mowing in areas and communities that are positive. Sanitize between those accounts is a good thing to do, just to be certain that your equipment is not transmitting from one community that has it to communities that do not currently have it. And so to do that, remove the clippings from the equipment at the account, leave them there, blow them off of the equipment. Use a labeled sanitizer on the tires, decks, and blades. Again, we're talking about between accounts, between communities, one that has it, one that doesn't, or allow the equipment to dry before starting the next account. Once that equipment dries and that plant material completely dries out on that mower or on that string trimmer, it no longer poses a threat for us, for our community that does not have the disease. We're talking about pest control operators that are in a community trying to manage disease and grass. What I have been telling them, and our best management recommendations for them, are that if you suspect lethal viral necrosis or mosaic, get it confirmed early. The earlier we can educate folks in communities about what's going on, the better, because we don't waste money on fungicides, herbicides, other things that ultimately will not save the grass from dying from the disease. Once we know what it is, we can start talking about replacement strategies and other options for homeowners and HOAs to consider. Rumor control, there are a lot of unsubstantiated claims about ways to cure this problem or novel things that have worked anecdotally or observationally. And if you have questions about those, contact your county office or me directly, and happy to address those, happy to investigate them and see if there's any truth to some of these. And there have been some good ideas come out of that. So far, none that have panned out as far as reducing or eliminating the threat of this disease or preventing it from running its course and doing the damage it does to Floratam. Sod producers, I may not have mentioned earlier, but sod is not a suspected source of this virus. We have worked with sod producers at the Sod Producer Cooperative within the state, Turf Producers Florida. We've received many samples. We've worked with growers to educate them on the disease issues, and we have not found the virus and the problem on sod farms to date. So what we've been telling them is to educate your employees, people who are buying sod to replace diseased lawns, maybe bringing back rip-out material, establish a protocol for decontamination on the farm to prevent it from being introduced, dispose of that material off farm, and consider limiting customer traffic, installer traffic in production areas. In addition, Dr. Kenworthy, I think we'll talk about efforts in working with sod growers to come up with ways to ensure that the products that we're selling and that are being used to replace these lawns that are affected with LVN do not contain the Floratam genetics. And that's been a real challenge for us that we're continuing to work closely with sod producers, installers, et cetera, as we move forward. I'm gonna put my contact information here. This is my office number. I am on Twitter, Turf Dr. Man, and my email address is pfharmon@ufl.edu. I'll leave that up for just a second. Facebook, UF Rapid Turf is the search term that'll come up with our diagnostic service that we use. Dr. Romina-Gazis will talk about diagnostic efforts and how to sample and determine if you have mosaic a little later. And so with that, thank you for your attention and for joining us today. I will turn it back over to Laurie, and we can move on from there.
Thank you, Dr. Harmon. I hope that answers some of your questions. Some questions did come into the chat room. Those that were relatively easy. Henry and I and Dr. Kenworthy, provided some answers there, but there were some that, I preferred to have Dr. Harmon with his level of knowledge cover. So let me get to that. There was one, do nematodes play any part in LVN before or after?
Nematodes, so excellent question. And there's no direct evidence that nematodes play a direct role in LVN development or mosaic. They're not vectors of the virus or anything of that nature. But I will say that stresses other than cool temperature stress can influence the severity of the LVN and the occurrence and the transition from mosaic to LVN. In other words, if you have nematodes that stress the turf grass, you may find that your LVN, the necrosis, the death, comes quicker or more severe than if you do not have those same stresses. Those would include nematodes, other fungal diseases, et cetera. So nematodes are one stress that affect turf. If they're stressing turf, that might be turf that's more severely affected by that mosaic, and then LVN later in the game. As far as direct connection, no.
Thank you. And here's another question. Has it been located at any sod farm, being the majority of St. Augustinegrass is located in Palm Beach County?
Yeah, we have not found it on any sod farm. We've had pretty good cooperation from our sod producers as far as sending us samples, sending us material to evaluate. we've had 0 detections of sugarcane mosaic virus on sod farms. Why that is, I can't say. We don't know where this strain of the virus came from. One potential hypothesis was that it has come in on some kind of ornamental grass, like a fountain grass or something, in paspalum, something like that. We don't know what the answer is. If it was an ornamental grass, it'd be possible that we are not going to see that on a sod farm, so it hasn't been introduced, and there's limited feedback from affected landscapes into the sod farm production facilities. So we haven't found it to date. We're continuing to educate sod growers on what it looks like. If it did get into a Floratam sod farm, they would know about it because it would drastically impact their production.
Thank you. And we had a question. Let me just go up here a little bit so I can get it. We are in an HOA with large common areas. If we were to install ground cover strips in the common areas to separate lawn areas, how wide should these barriers be to be effective in slowing the spread?
Yeah.
Please mute whoever is, I heard some background noise, so we want to hear Dr. Harmon's response.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I think it boils down again to aesthetics. If they would like to use these barriers to kind of break up sod and turf, it's more of an aesthetic choice and determination than it will be likely to stop or slow the spread of the virus. So I guess in other words, you can certainly do that. It's not going to impact the spread and the rate of progression. If it did, it would be very minor, and it's maybe shifting the disease from one year to the next, from one category of severity down one lower, and ultimately it's not going to have a big impact in doing that. And I'm going on what I know about the virus as a plant pathologist, but also on what we've seen other folks try to do as far as cutting out sod, installing barriers, beds, roundupping areas to kill all host plant material. It has not worked, again, probably because of that aphid mechanism of transmission and the fact that the virus tends to spread out much further than we know. In 2 or 3 years of spread, it moves many lawns beyond where we see the symptoms in the current year.
Thanks. And another question that has come in, if the temperature drops below 64 degrees, will every, St. Augustine grass lawn develop necrosis, or, certainly the Floratam ones?
Yeah, so it is generally associated with the cooler temperatures. It's not 100% guarantee that every lawn will react exactly the same. In biology, that just doesn't happen. And so what we see is that we see continued exposure to cooler temperatures, increase the likelihood of that transition to lethal viral necrosis and death. We see stresses on the grass that include fungal and other disease issues. Increase the likelihood that will transition to the death, and the percentage of that lawn that will transition to the lethal viral necrosis stage. But no, it's not necessarily a switch. It varies from lawn to lawn. Generally, though, it's followed the patterns that I've described.
Thank you. We have, are there other landscape ground covers or sods recommended to replace Floratam besides palmetto or citra blue sod? And I would like, we're getting a lot of questions about sourcing and where can I find this, or what else can you do? I would like to remind people that Dr. Kenworthy will be coming up, and he will be talking about various cultivars of St. Augustine grass, and he'll be able to answer some of those questions. He also did put in the chat room a good link for finding sources. So he would be the person that will cover those sort of questions with there. We did just get another question, and Dr. Kenworthy just repeated and put that floridaturf.com is the go-to website for availability of different turf grasses. So that is, coming from the expert, and that's the go-to. We had a question, does watering times and frequency have any concerns? I guess in terms of disease, and I think you've kind of answered that one, Dr. Harmon, but we still have questions.
I think it has very minor impact on the viral disease itself. Of course, watering times and frequencies need to be followed within what's recommended for the species to keep other disease, fungal disease in particular, from becoming severe. That can impact the virus, as I mentioned. So generally, we want to try to follow those recommendations for fertility and watering. And Dr. Unruh will cover more of that a little later as well, as far as how you take care of sod that's been recently installed.
Okay, and one more question. Well, actually two, and then I'm going to cut it off because we have to keep on a time frame here.
Sure.
If the virus is widespread throughout a community, do you recommend replacing palmetto-side throughout every home?
Yeah, so great question. I get this question a lot, and I think this is a personal choice for the HOA and for the homeowners that are involved. It's something they have to work out, and it depends on what their tolerance for unsightly looking turf grass is. Again, as I mentioned, it's not a thing that has to be done for human or animal health safety standards or anything like that. It's something that the grass that we know is going to progress in a certain fashion, the time frame of which might shift a little bit as far as more quickly or less quickly. Eventually, I think what will happen is that Floratam will become unsightly. It'll become lawns that no one wants to look at and will have to be replaced. Whether it's done all at once or as a piecemeal or some hybrid in between is up to the individuals that are involved there. It hasn't drastically impacted the rate of spread. We haven't seen, for instance, where we wait and don't do anything, it just blows up and gets much worse than where we try to change out lawns more proactively. So it's a personal choice. I think the end result will be the same. The Floratam in these affected communities will no longer be acceptable as turf quality goes. But the route that we take to get there is really it's personal choice and impacted by fiscal concerns and many other concerns.
Okay, and one last question, because it's a good one, and I do know we have experts who are monitoring the chat room, and I think in previous times Dr. Harmon has stayed on and answered some questions as they come in. I know Dr. Kenworthy is on, Henry is on, so we do have people who are responding as they come in. But the last question we're going to talk about here at this time is, has Provista been tested? And if not, when will it be?
And that's a good question. Provista is a new variety that's released by Scott's Miracle-Gro company. It has some advantages in that it has a slower growth rate, requires less frequent mowing. It has glyphosate resistance. So glyphosate's a tool that can be used as a non-selective, generally a non-selective herbicide, can be sprayed over the top of this to manage weeds. I have not evaluated it for LVN susceptibility. I have reached out to Scott's and asked for comment and from their growers, sod growers within the state, and also their technical representatives. And I would encourage you, if you are considering Provista sod, to reach out to one of the Scott's representatives to ask them the latest data and latest interpretation of their research. I haven't done it here at UF. The last time I asked them, they told me that Provista is not being recommended as a replacement for lawns that have died from lethal viral necrosis. Provista is very closely related. The current line of Provista on the market is very closely related to Floratam, and it's unclear at this point whether or not it will develop lethal viral necrosis. But my understanding was they were not recommending it at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. And with that, we're going to go on to the rest of the program. I think I am next. Is that correct, Dr. Gazis? Are you coming after me?
Either way.
Okay, well, I'm going to go next, I guess. And I will share my screen right now. I'm going to talk about where is my presentation? Whoops, X. Let's get out of this. I don't want to leave the meeting. No, I do not want to leave this meeting. So where is this? I'm going to get out of here, go into here. Sorry about that. and we are up. Can everybody see the screen? Thank you. I want to talk about lethal viral necrosis in Palm Beach County because we are one of the hardest hit counties. I know Miami-Dade started a little later than we are. So here in Palm Beach County, we are number one, yay, in this. And I want to talk about some changes first for those of you who are in Palm Beach County. We've had a lot of changes in our office. Bill Shaw, who was a commercial horticulture agent, retired back last April. So I've been pretty much holding down the fort since then. And some people, including some of our specialists, do not know this, but I have a retirement date. And that is my Valentine's Day gift to myself, which is coming up next month on Valentine's Day. I'll be monitoring my email since then, but I'm not really in the office except sporadically. So we do have a new commercial horticulture agent here named John Roberts. He started last week. And I've been, kind of filling him in. He can't be on this session because he's at our HR department learning everything he needs to know, but this is his contact information here. He's a great guy. He has been an agent with the University of Florida. He was in Orange County. They did not have lethal viral necrosis there, but so he is experienced. He has a PhD in environmental horticulture. He's got great people skills, so I have great confidence in him and his ability to be able to help you going forward. As we've talked about, lethal viral necrosis in our county was first identified in November 2014, although it was there the year before. That's when we got our first, diagnosis of what this is, but now it is widespread throughout the county. And every year we have more and more community associations and resident lawns test positive. My phone and Dr. Harmon's phone at this time of year and our emails are just, very active with new cases. And lethal viral necrosis is, of course, a turf grass issue. We're very grateful for the input of our scientists, without whom we would know so little about this disease. But from the standpoint of working on it on a county level, it is an educational issue because everyone from our green industry professionals to our HOA boards to residents, this is something they haven't seen before, don't necessarily understand. So that's why we do the kind of presentations we're doing now. Of course, it is a huge financial issue for the residents and communities that have this. And I have to say, I have a real understanding of this because I live in an HOA that has tested positive for lethal viral necrosis. So of all the experts here, I also have the ability to understand this from it's going to come out of my pocket standpoint. So I feel your pain if you're in this situation. And back when we had the first diagnosis, we have 561 homes. And back then, if we had one company giving us a deal for replacing all the Floratam turf, the cost was over $3 million for my particular HOA. So this is huge. And it's why it's really hard for us to talk about this disease, although we have to, because it's not good news for anyone. And we understand that. It's an emotional issue. For those of you who don't know what this is a very famous piece of art called The Scream. And that's kind of one of the ways that people react to hearing this diagnosis. So it's almost like the stages of grief, if you're familiar with that. When people learn that their community has this disease or their property, we see a lot of denial. We see, and sometimes magical thinking from the boards. Oh, if we only mow a certain way, or if we only get someone to sanitize appropriately, we are going to stop this in its tracks, and it's only going to affect the first couple homes where it was diagnosed. Unfortunately, that is not what we have seen with this disease. There's a lot of anger, of course, because this is an expense that people didn't expect. And so, there have been times where I've been out in a community association where, things can get pretty tough out there. with residents wanting to start fights and all that kind of stuff. And again, that doesn't get us anywhere with this disease. Eventually, when there are a lot of homes, what happens is, we get into the acceptance stage where, oh, look, hundreds of lawns in our community look really bad. We need to do something. But for boards, you've already been through this. And as Dr. Harmon also explained, lethal viral necrosis is a process. When it's first diagnosed in a community, generally there's only a couple of lawns, maybe patches in these lawns that don't look really well. And when I go out to communities that first have this disease, naturally the first people who have it are like, why me? But as it progresses, and what we have seen is it may start out relatively slowly, but at some point there is a critical mass that tends to happen where we see a lot of lawns just develop this disease. And in some communities in 1 year, all of a sudden 100 lawns will have it or whatever. So it is a process from when the first lawns are diagnosed to when it is hundreds of lawns are looking bad in a community. But I will say that in communities that we've been tracking that have had this disease for 6 years or so, I know of one that has about 600 homes, and within that time frame, over 90% of the homes have been affected by the disease. And that's an HOA where they followed recommendations, where they sanitized equipment, where they did everything that we could, ask them to do. So this is a process, and we can slow it, as Dr. Harmon said, but we cannot stop the virus. So Dr. Harmon also covered this, but for the green industry professionals, and I took a lot of this from my former colleague, Bill Schall, again, what often happens is, we see parts of the lawn dying. People don't get down on their hands and knees. So, we'll put down a fungicide. That does nothing. Correct diagnosis at the onset is very important. And education early on is also key. So for boards and residents and for the green industry professionals who talk to them, there are some that are going to adopt a wait and see attitude, but others will demand, for aesthetics or whatever reason, immediately replacement of affected lawns. And sometimes being proactive about this demonstrates that the board is on top of it, that they're acting for residents. But some boards, they want to wait and see for more available replacement options or see what happens. And for some boards that really feel overwhelmed by this, and we have so many lawns there that we can't go out to every community affected and answer, every single question and give them a real game plan. There are landscape consultants out there. If you're interested, we have a list here of those in Palm Beach County, or some of them in Palm Beach County. And some communities have hired a consultant. There will be a fee with that to help go over every single lawn, help the board create a plan and that kind of thing. And they can also be helpful for finding other problems also. For green industry professionals, the residents are going to expect them to treat the problem and make it go away. And that is not going to happen, unfortunately. That's kind of a wishful thinking type of thing, because we don't have really any way to prevent this disease or any way to cure it. And the residents also often want to blame someone. And, sometimes it will be, or, the lawn care professionals. And sometimes residents will even distrust the diagnosis. They will, there's a test been done on the property, and I've heard from residents who are like, I don't trust the test. I don't trust the landscapers. I want to go out and make my own test. Now, first of all, if you're in a community where the disease is present, and there have been lots of lawns tested, at this point, if they show you a test and it's from, the University of Florida, you can pretty much assume that you have this disease. For those people who say to me, no, I want my own test, I don't trust anyone, here's what you have to understand. If you sample a part of the lawn where the disease is not present, that test is going to come up negative. And so you can get a negative result and your lawn or parts of it still may have the disease. So you have to understand where and how to test. My recommendation, if you're concerned, would be to contact the board, get the landscaper out there, have them show you the symptoms, you know, and all of that. There's still a lot of unknowns out there and, you know, confusion with, you know, mosaic symptoms versus lethal viral necrosis. And again, I can't say this enough, that at this point, the symptoms of death only happen with Floratam, although some of the other replacements may get streaking. You are not going to see that unless you get down on your hands and knees. And people are always looking for a greater need for replacement options. For me, you know, knowing that eventually my lawn will probably get it, I'm taking this as an opportunity because I don't use a lot of my lawn. And I've always thought, hey, I'd like a patio out there. Well, maybe this is the time for me to do that because I'd have cost involved in replacing the lawn. So, you know, there are things, you know, to look at it as an opportunity. As Dr. Harmon said, or what we hear from green industry professionals is that sanitation does not seem to slow the spread much, especially if homeowners are getting their own companies. Because when people are hiring other companies, especially if they hire other companies to mow, that is just going to increase the opportunity potentially for spread, having a lot of people involved. And then for green industry professionals, it's also handling who is to blame. So let's talk about that issue because it comes up a lot. And, you know, as an agent, I deal with the emotional issues. So local ordinances here require mowing of properties, if not community aesthetics. Okay, so lawns have to be mowed. If you don't mow your lawns, you know, eventually someone will come around and cite you. And as Dr. Harmon explained, the virus may be present in lawn sap before the symptoms even show. So, you know, there can be spread before it is even diagnosed in a property. So this is what the early symptoms look like. Now imagine you are somebody mowing and this is the early symptoms. You are not going to see that and you're not going to know that. And this is really the only way that you're going to find symptoms. And that is actually Dr. Harmon and my former colleague, Bill Shaw, out on a site looking for the symptoms of lethal viral necrosis. Now, you know, from a money standpoint, from a time standpoint, lawn care companies can't do this. You know, they're not going to be able to find this disease standing at 6 feet tall, mowing at the rate they have to mow to make things cost effective. Then there is the natural spread of this disease, because if you've ever really looked at St. Augustinegrass, it spreads by runners. That's why we edge to keep it out of our, you know, ornamental beds and everything. So there's going to be natural spread of this disease, whether lawn equipment is used or not, because those, you know, it's just going to spread by runners. The sap is in the runners. And it can spread, it can get into a property by, okay, you know, there's a community next door that has the disease. And now that's growing into the new community. So and incidentally, we didn't cover this, but there may also be some aphid spread, not a lot. But I can't tell you looking at this whether or not this lawn has lethal viral necrosis. And what I also can talk about is some case studies, not studies, really case histories of places where I have first diagnosed the disease and said, send in a sample because that is what you do. In one particular case, we had a community and there was one lawn in the middle of the community that had the disease, and that was the only lawn that year. How did that happen? Because this community had new equipment, and it was a big enough community that that equipment was stored on site. So it wasn't going to other HOAs, bringing anything in, okay? And one lawn has the disease. How did that happen? Well, maybe this was a case of incidental spread, you know, but eventually that community had more. You know, how do we explain sometimes that a community will have this disease And then all of a sudden it spreads to median, and there are different companies there and different equipment being used. So again, with diseases, there are a lot of factors that we may not even know. And we just have to understand that not everything can be controlled. And the blame game really doesn't get us anywhere, because the real question is, what do we do now that the disease is here? So zoysia grass, which is an option, is going to be more expensive to maintain. And it is also going to be, it can get more diseases because it doesn't really like our climate down here in South Florida. And as Dr. Harmon mentioned, palmetto and other St. Augustine grass cultivars can be more susceptible to some fungal diseases than Floratam. There was a reason we all use Floratam. And in terms of cost, some people are like, well, do we replace just a small patch or area, or plugging is a way of just plugging in parts of the grass. And you can do that, but it's going to be more expensive in the long run, simply because a lot of sod is sold by how much you're buying, and the price goes down based on the amount you're buying. And most HOAs can't afford to replace all the lawns at once. I don't know of HOAs that have millions of dollars in their slush fund out there. For the association board, of course, slowing the spread is an issue, and deciding on appropriate alternatives, how we're going to replace the sod that's been affected, when and what kind of assessments are we going to do. And there also will be, in terms of replacement, glyphosate and herbicide issues. Some people may not want glyphosate to be spread on lawns. I will tell you, this is a problem that happens in associations at the very beginning when only a few lawns are affected, because in the associations I have talked to, by the time you're maybe have 50 lawns a year, 100 lawns a year affected, people no longer care. They want the community aesthetics, and they just want it to be dealt with quickly and gone. Because nobody wants to live in a community where you've got lots of lawns looking like this. So Dr. Harmon mentioned unreliable information that's out there. Yes, go on the internet, you will find that lethal viral necrosis is a hoax perpetrated by people who don't like lawns. And I would suggest that, Dr. Harmon has always struck me as a very intelligent person. And if in fact, he's somebody who doesn't like lawns, I might suggest respectfully that maybe the career choice was something that, could have been thought out better. Obviously, there's a lot of crazy stuff on the internet that you can read about anything. So again, reaching out to people who understand the disease, to understand the science, is very important. Because yes, you can read about crazy cures and all sorts of myths out there. And it's important to get the right information for people who are dealing with the disease. So, and the other thing I will mention, I also have seen company websites that deal with the disease. And some of them are not updated as often as we might hope. So some companies I have seen with information that we had early on that maybe has changed with the more we've learned about the disease. So, and so how do association boards respond? Some really want to be involved. They want to be a valuable resource. They're there to help their constituents. Others really want a hands-off approach. Again, please mute. And some have a hybrid in terms of, yeah. Okay, so most are going to assess for common areas because they can't cover the costs from their funds. Some are going to handle front lawns through assessment and say to the back lawns, that's resident responsibility. Some are going to designate one company to do all the replacement, and others are going to say, okay, these are the 3 companies that we want you to use. And, again, if you have one company or a select list, they may be buying in higher volume, so prices may be more competitive. It also allows the boards to make sure that, they have some control and people aren't just going to companies that might be more fly by night or not accredited, you know, or there's not really an accreditation, but, you know, there are companies out there who, you know, may not be the best in terms of, you know, I'm just not going to go there. So many will set homeowner deadlines and contingencies. You know, your lawn has this disease. It's been tested. We know your lawn has the disease. These are our expectations. You know, they'll give them a deadline to deal with the disease and always contingencies. If you don't, this is what's going to happen. So one thing I want to talk about real quick is, you know, in HOAs where, you know, back in the day where we had fewer HOAs and we did go out before COVID and, you know, talk to some of the larger ones. And we can't talk to every HOA because there are literally hundreds now that have this disease in our county. So it will come up, somebody will say, well, what about synthetic turf grass? And I will mention that synthetic turf grass is not considered to be Florida friendly by the University of Florida. This question came up so often that I actually reached out to some of our experts in the field. And I said, you know, would it be possible to come up with a publication that professionals or boards or residents can look at to understand synthetic turf grass, what it can and it can't do? And I'm happy to say that recently our experts from the University of Florida, including Dr. Unruh, who will be speaking later, really put out a great publication that is a resource when you get these questions. So for non-community residents out there, there's really a lack of education because we have a lot of companies, and this is what I was getting on. There are companies out there that don't have proper pesticide licenses, that may not have the education to understand this disease. It's hard to reach every company. We have 3,500 licensed companies and a lot more that aren't. And for people, individual residents, they report that there will be potential language barriers in communicating with the mowing crews sometimes. And so they may say, we don't want you to mow there because we know you have the disease here. So that can be another issue. And then I just want to mention that Palm Beach County has a website devoted to lethal viral necrosis. Bill Shaw put this together, and this is where we will post this webinar when we have it. And it has frequently asked questions so that you can go there, pictures, fact sheets, and cultivar alternatives, all sorts of information. So that is available, as well as contacting Dr. Harmon or your local agents. So that's it for me. And I'm going to turn it over to, I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gazis, who is going to talk about identifying symptom sampling and diagnosis.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Romina-Gazis. I hope you can hear me well and see my slides. Perfect. So my name is Romina-Gazis. I am an assistant professor on plant pathology. I'm based at the Tropical Research and Education Center. And I'm also the director of the Plant Diagnostic Clinic here at the station, one of the multiple clinics that UF has. So today I'm going to be talking about how to identify some of the symptoms, how to sample for submitting a sample for diagnosis, and how is that we do this process of diagnosing the disease. So this is a very important workshop, and I'm very happy to see a lot of people attending this workshop because the cases have been increasing through time, especially in Miami-Dade County. So as you can see in this bar graph, you can see that we had multiple samples submitted in 2018, 2019, and so on. It has been increasing in terms of sample submission, but also the percentage of the samples that have been testing positive have also been increasing. And one of the changes that I have been noticing is that in 2018 and 2019, we got a lot of samples from Palm Beach County. But now in 2020 and 2021, we're getting many more samples from local companies in Miami-Dade County. So, you know, this is we're starting the third year of this kind of outbreak in Miami-Dade County. And as the other speakers have mentioned, this disease progresses through time, and you can get the whole lawn, the whole lawn can die on the year 3, you know, depending on the stress levels, on the temperature and other variables. But I'm really predicting that this year is gonna be pretty tough for Miami-Dade County. And I'm predicting that a lot of companies are gonna be submitting samples for diagnosing. So again, we are located at the Tropical Research and Education Center in Homestead. You can send samples by mail. You can pass by and drop samples here. I'm gonna be talking about how to submit good samples and what other resources you can access. So symptoms, again, this is very important to understand the symptoms, to be able to recognize the symptoms early on. And this disease is, the characteristic of the symptoms is this mosaic. And we call it mosaic because you can see these chlorotic patches on the blades. Sometimes these patches can be short and square, and sometimes these patches can be long and go along the veins and along the blade. So sometimes you can see them as streaking, chlorotic, yellowing of these blades. And we call them mosaic because it kind of looks like tiles that you arrange in a mosaic fashion. So that's the reason it's called kind of mosaic symptoms. But it's clearly, you can see this contrast of the green tissue against this chlorotic yellowing of these patches on the blades. Now, the symptoms also include a general yellowing of the grass as this disease progresses, and these yellow streakings along the veins. Sometimes you can even see a purplish color at the tip of the blades. Not always, but sometimes you can see it. And it will depend on the time of infection and how long that grass has been infected with the virus. Now, there also can be stunting of the grass, so you don't see it growing properly. It's because, of course, the grass is infected, therefore is compromised. Young plants are more susceptible to infection than mature ones. And again, as you can see in these pictures, sometimes you will see at the tip of these blades, this purplish color. Now, something really important to highlight is that the symptoms are temperature dependent, and the symptoms will change with time, depending on how long this turf has been infected with the virus. And this is something that Dr. Harmon talked about in his experiments, that he showed that infected turf, how you can see here in these pictures, you will see the chlorotic, this yellowing mosaic on the blades, which are the characteristic symptoms of this disease. But when the temperature drops, these patches become necrotic, right? Because these patches are actually dying, declining. And once temperature drops, the symptoms change to these necrotic, blackish patches on the blades. So this is very important to consider. So it really depends when you examine this grass that you will see these two different kind of extreme symptoms. And sometimes is, you know, the disease has progressed too much and you are not going to be able to see those mosaic, nice, very characteristic symptoms of the disease. That is very helpful for us as an indicator that the grass is infected. So for instance, you can see at the lower side of your slide, you can see that all these pieces of blades, which is actually a sample submitted to the clinic, you cannot really recognize any of the symptoms, right? Because the blade is already dead, decaying, So timing is very important. Now, again, the symptoms change through time. Let's say that the infection happens during the summer. Temperatures are definitely above 65, very warm, nice. And you can see if the turf is infected, you're going to be able to see those chlorotic yellowing streaks on the blade, characteristic of the disease. Then as time passes, as the season changes and the temperature drops, you will see that these patches of chlorotic tissue are going to become necrotic, up to the point that the whole turf is going to be dead, and then it's going to dry, and it's going to look like you see here at the end of the progression. Now we live I live at least in South Florida. Some of you guys are up north, where you get colder temperatures. But even here in Miami-Dade County, in Palm Beach County, in Monroe, in Broward, you will have temperatures lower than 65, which is, like we mentioned, kind of like the threshold for the mosaic to become necrotic. So this is a chart showing the minimum temperatures for 2020, and like right now we are also having kind of like a cold spell passing by. And so even though you think that it's warm and the winters are really mild and comfortable here in South Florida, at nights and sometimes few days, depending on the month, we have these cold spells. So the temperature does drop below 65. And it's very interesting because, you know, that happens January and February, and it's exactly when we get a bunch of samples at the clinic, right? Because, and what I think it happens is that during the summer, you know, there are already a lot of lawns that are infected with the virus. However, during the summer, you don't get these necrotic symptoms, you just get a yellowing. And so, you know, homeowners and landscapers might think, oh, well, let's put more fertilizer. You know, it's yellowing. We want to make it more green. So we put more fertilizer. Maybe there's a fungal problem. Maybe there's weeds problem. So they are treating this grass that have been misdiagnosed for this purpose. So I think that a lot of people might already have their lawns infected during the summer. However, they are taking other measurements to make it better. And sometimes, yes, you know, it's a growing season for grasses, especially the spring. So you get a lot of new growth that might still be green because, you know, it hasn't been infected yet. You get the wheat also growing green. So it can be that the symptoms of little viral necrosis can be masked. However, once the temperatures drop, and the homeowners start seeing this necrotic turf on their lawns, they kind of freak out, right? So they start calling the pest control companies, they start coming. If they don't live in a community, they start coming to the clinic and submitting samples for diagnosis. So definitely the amount of samples submitted for diagnosis increases during the winter season, which makes sense, because the symptoms are pretty severe and dramatic in a way. So it's very important to learn how to recognize the symptoms early, so no more resources are invested and mitigation can be planned. Just like my colleagues that spoke before me, they mentioned that this disease cannot be cured. So, you know, it's better to know that you have it, because if not, you're going to be spending all this money in trying to fix something that is not fixable yet. So very important. So how LVN looks in the field. So these are very nice pictures sent by a client. And you can see that there is a widespread yellowing and death of the lawn. This is a pretty advanced state, right? Probably this lawn has been infected for 2 or more years. So you can see that it has spread throughout the garden. And you see this widespread yellowing. There's no really a patch. There's no a a circumscribed section of the lawn that is dying, but on the other hand is spread throughout. Now it's spread throughout, as it was mentioned before, because grasses, plugs are connected, right? So once a plug is infected, the virus becomes systemic. It will invade the vascular system of the grass, and it will go through the stolons all the way to whatever is attached to that connection, right? That is connected the plugs of turf. So that's the reason it really spreads like wildfire in a way, right? It's very easy to spread. And then you get these symptoms of white, yellowing, and not really a localized, circumscribed section of the lawn. Another clue that you might have LVN is when you see those traces, you know, those kind of lines across the lawn where you see more of a dead turf along those thank you, sorry, along those trails of, and why? Well, because we use the lawn mower, right? And that's a way, one of the ways of transmission of this virus. So when we cut the grass, we open a wound. The wet grass, yeah, thank you. So whenever you cut the grass, you're gonna open a wound, and then the sap is gonna come out of this wound, and then the sap is moist, and then you cut the next piece of grass, and then that's how you pass the virus from one section to the other one. So you can clearly see the evidence that the lawn mower has been the one spreading the virus in this case. Now, there's a lot of other diseases out there affecting turf, and some of them can be confused with lethal viral necrosis. One of them is this gray leaf spot, very common in our area. And, you know, if you look very close, yes, they look different. Gray leaf spot, you can see that has a kind of whitish center. It has this necrotic circling around that lesion. However, when you see them from far away, it could be confused with the necrotic patches that you see at the end of the LVN. Another disease that can be confused is rust. We don't see it very often in Miami-Dade County, but I have had some samples submitted with this disease. And when the rust is not sporulating, that is producing the spores, when you see this powdery, rusty sign of the fungus on the leaves, you will see lesions that might be chlorotic. So those lesions can also be confused with the lesions caused by the virus. Now, in comparison to brown patch or large patch caused by Rhizoctonia, a fungal disease, very extremely common in Miami-Dade County, and I think in a lot of the southern counties of Florida, you can see that this disease causes these very distinctive patches. Sometimes they are rounded, sometimes they are irregular, but you clearly see those patches, right? You will also see the root rot symptoms when you have that disease, because this disease affects the roots and compromises the roots and decays the roots, causing root rot symptoms. Then take-all root rot is also another of the very common fungal diseases affecting not only St. Augustine, but a lot of multiple other grass species. And you can clearly see that this disease also causes these very, very localized patches of death. And then another thing that you can see in this disease is that you have this melting of the turf, right? Very characteristic. If you pull the turf, you're gonna see those rotted and really mushy and wet tissue in the root system and at the base of the blades. And this is easily distinguished under the microscope. You can see the fungal structures attached to the roots. So how do we sample for this disease? And this is very, very important. The perfect sample includes a lot of green tissue, that has symptoms, right? So again, you have to look closely and see and look for patches on your lawn that has these characteristic mosaic symptoms. Now, this sample, you can see that also has another leaf spot symptoms, but you can also see that multiple blades have this mosaic symptom. So that's a very good sample. Now here, I'm just showing you a perfect sample, right? So one that has a lot of tissue for me to test, one that is symptomatic. And so this would be a very good sample for testing. Now, most of the sample look like this. Some of the blades are already drying and have dieback and are decaying, some root rot, but I can still find in a sample like this several pieces where I can take for testing that are symptomatic. There's enough green tissue that is good for sampling. Now, most of the samples that we get through the clinic have multiple diseases. Even the ones with the that are positive for lethal viral necrosis are accompanied by other diseases. Usually these fungal root rot diseases, okay? So yes, you will see these rotted roots and then like, oh no, my turf has this root rot, so no, you can have both diseases. You can have more than 2 diseases, you can have 3 diseases. But in this case, if you have lethal viral necrosis, then, you know, that's kind of like the end point. If you have other disease, for instance, rhizoctonia, or you have Takol disease, those are manageable diseases. But just to show you that usually samples are complex and they include more than one symptom from different diseases. Now, how do we diagnose this disease? Unfortunately, we can't use the traditional methods that are quick and inexpensive, like microscopy or culturing, because viruses cannot be cultured and viruses cannot be observed under light microscopy, which is a quick way of processing samples. So because they are so tiny that we can't see them with light microscopy, we have to use other methods. So the number one step is to look for symptomatic tissue, as I mentioned before. So what you're gonna do is go to this client that you have or to your own property that you think is having problems, then look for places where you can find a patch of grass that still has green tissue, but that is symptomatic, okay? Now you have to be careful. As it was mentioned before, sometimes we have a lawn that has a mix of genotypes. Sometimes you have this Floratam that is dying, but it's mixed with palmetto or with other St. Augustine grasses, or even weed that looks green and happy. So be careful to choose those kind of turf, the one that is not actually St. Augustine grass, which has happened, right? I have had submissions that is mainly composed of weeds instead of the real problem, the real host. So number one, look for symptomatic tissue. And remember, this will vary with the season. If you are sampling during the summer, you will likely be looking for mosaic. If you are sampling during the winter, a lot of the blades are gonna be decayed. So you have to kind of look for some of the left green tissue. Now collect a good sample. Even for if you are not interested in testing for the virus and you're interested in testing for other things like root rot or leaf spot, is recommend to submit enough sample, right? What is enough sample? You can go to the website of this clinic or to the turf clinic, and then you will find some instructions on how to do that. But in general, you know, you should include enough green tissue for testing. Roots need to be included, okay? And it's good to also submit at least 1 to 2 cups of soil in case we need to look at the soil. Now, this is still a good sample, even though it looks a little bit like borderline. Why? Because there's still symptomatic green tissue to test. Sometimes we have to do more than one test in case the first one is inconclusive. So please, please, please include enough living tissue. The virus needs living tissue to survive. If you submit dead tissue, I'm not going to be able to find the cause of death. What is a bad sample? Bad sample looks like this. The one at your left, it's not symptomatic for the virus, and the few blades left are really in bad shape. The one at the middle, almost, even there is a blade that has some kind of mosaic samples, I wouldn't be able to do multiple testing. I wouldn't be able to really examine the problem. A lot of the turf is dead and melting and decaying. And of course, the one at your right, there's nothing really to look at. And I'm just showing real cases of samples submitted to the clinic by professional landscapers, not only by homeowners. So if you are in doubt, it's always better to call the clinic, to send an email, send pictures. We can really help you and guide you through the process of submitting a sample. Now, step 3 is to fill the form. Okay, we have different forms for the clinic in Homestead and the clinic in Gainesville. So check out the websites, but very important to include your name, your phone number, your email address. You're gonna receive the report through the email. Check your email. Sometimes the report goes to the junk box. So if you haven't received your report in 7 to 10 days, please call the clinic, and I'm sure it is somewhere that you might have missed it. So very important to tell us which county you are sending the sample from so we can have a good record, and also which variety you are sending. I am not a turf expert, so for me, All St. Augustine kind of looks the same. And maybe the same for you, but if you know the variety, please let us know so we can have better records. One important thing to mention is that once you collect this perfect sample for submission, do not put it in the back of your truck, do not put it on the front of your truck and leave it there for days under the sun, under the heat. The sample is gonna degrade. Okay, you can pass by the clinic if you live relatively close. You can do in-person submission, or you can send a sample through the mail. We do take sample through the mail. It is a good practice you can put the sample inside a plastic bag. It can be a Ziploc, it can be just a plastic bag. Do not put any wet paper towel inside. Okay, that will increase moisture. We don't want that. Do not put anything wet inside. And even better if you can put some dry paper towel, so the moisture is going to be absorbed and decay is going to be slowed down. If you're sending the sample through the mail and you have enough green tissue in the sample, it will likely make it in good shape. Now, you can send it not necessarily overnight. It doesn't have to be refrigerated. You can just send it 3-4 days. If you have included enough tissue, I should be able to get it in good shape here at the clinic. Now, pictures, photos are welcome. You can send it to the email of the clinic. You can send it to my email. And that, it's really good for us to have a good record of the symptoms, and in case samples need to be retested, knowing the field symptoms really help us with the diagnosis. Now, this is how we do it. Symptomatic turf is easy to diagnose, relatively easy to diagnose. We can use these serological tests, which are immune strips and really easy to use. I'm going to explain how do we do this, and we will have the results in 30 minutes. Now, if you want to test a turf that is not symptomatic, then it becomes a little bit complicated. And it's just because of the threshold of detection, right? Just like with COVID, when you have really low titer, low concentration of viruses, more sophisticated techniques have to be used in order to quantify and to detect. this virus in the sample. Now, my laboratory can do ELISA, which is a more complicated method, and it's more time consuming and more expensive on asymptomatic turf. However, I will, recommend maybe to send it to the clinic in Gainesville, or if you are local and wanted to send it here, to contact me before, and we can arrange a multiple sample testing so we can maximize the testing this way. So these strips are very easy to use. There's a YouTube video that you can look up. Here is the address. And what we need is living tissue, right? We need this tissue to be green and symptomatic, and it's like a pregnancy test. You just dip the immunostrip in the solution, and then you get positive results when you see 2 lines, and when you see no line, when there's no line, there's a negative result. The very dark red line in the immunostrips are the controls. So how does it work? We get a piece of these blades that are infected and symptomatic, and then we grind them in a buffer solution that comes with the kit. We kind of really grind them using a stone or something hard. Anything that you have to really break the tissue and let the sap, because that's where the virus is, let the sap come out of the green tissue and into the solution, and then you dip the immunostrip into the solution very carefully, that the chlorophyll, the green pigment of the plant, does not get absorbed by the pad in the immunostrip. And then you will read it at the 30 minutes. Now, it sounds very easy, and it's kind of easy to do it in a laboratory condition. However, you have to be careful when you do it in the field, or for people that are new to this kind of testing, it might fail. When you use too much plant tissue, it might fail. When you use too little plant tissue, it may fail as well. The recommended is 0.15 grams in the 3 milliliters of buffer. Now these bags with the buffer come prepared already, so you don't have to measure the amount of buffer. Okay, so you can actually do this, your company, if you can do this by yourself. You can train your people to do this testing by yourself. Henry and I have organized several workshops here in Homestead, teaching these landscaping companies and pest control companies on how to do this. So it is possible to do this, but there are things that need to be considered, right? You need to use symptomatic plant tissue. You need to keep the strips and the buffer refrigerated. Okay, once you receive these strips, you have to put it in the fridge. And when you are not using them, you have to store them in the fridge. So that might be a limitant for people that are traveling to test lawns far away from their headquarters. The strip need to be submerged into the solution, but not too deep, because then the green pigment is gonna kind of be absorbed by the strips, and then you're gonna end up with a green strip, and you cannot read the line, the testing line. And sometimes we need to repeat a few times because of this threshold of sensitivity. And very important, you need to read the results at the 30 minutes. If you leave it for an hour and a half, you will get a false positive. And we have been in conversation with the company to trying to understand why is this happening. But it has happened to me multiple times that a real negative tested by other means will give a false positive if you leave too long the strip submerged into the plant juice solution. So again, you can do this by yourself. You can buy these kits for your company. The price has gone up this year, unfortunately. And but you can buy 25 strips for $173, which will make $7 per test. These kits come with the baggie already and with the buffer. And the bag has a mesh that is going to help you break in this tissue. Okay, so these are very user-friendly. There's a lot of resources, a lot of videos in YouTube that you can watch. So you don't have to send a sample to the clinic. You can do it by yourself, but of course, we are happy to receive samples here and do it in a more, controlled conditions, the testing. The resources, again, you can send it to the Rapid Turf Grass Diagnostic Service up in Gainesville. Or you can send your samples here to the Plant Diagnostic Clinic located at the Tropical Research and Education Center. I really want to stress that a timely diagnosis can save you money in the long run. If your lawn is positive for the virus, there's no pesticide or fertilizer that will cure it. So it's better to know now so you can plan ahead than keep investing resources in trying to fix a problem that you can't fix. So with that, thank you for listening. This is my contact information. Here is the phone number for the Plant Diagnostic Clinic. We are open Monday to Friday from 8 to 5. And so we are here to help you. We are here to help you with the testing and give you instructions on how to submit a proper sample so you get a rapid and accurate diagnosis.
Thank you very much for this presentation, and we're right on time. We're scheduled for a very short break right now. We're scheduled for about 5 minutes during that time, so you can get up, you can stand, you can, do what you need to do, and we'll be back in about 5 minutes. During that time, if you want to post some questions into the chat room, I think most of them have been answered, or we'll answer them or go over them later on from more of our experts, because we're going to be talking about available cultivars or options in terms of different species. We're going to be talking about reestablishing lawns and other issues that come up with the disease. So we'll see you back in about a couple minutes, and we'll continue on with this webinar.
Hey, Laurie, I'll go ahead and share mine so that it's up and ready to go. Hey, Laurie, you're going to have to give me an ability to share.
Checking time there. Let me go, and I'm going to have to, what am I going to have to do?
I'm not,
yeah, you can,
right now, I don't have an ability to share.
Yeah, you can share now, Kevin.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Ingrid.
Okay, we just had a question come in. Is there any evidence of LV lethal viral necrosis in Polk County? Dr. Harmon,
Yeah, Polk, no, I don't believe we've had a confirmed positive for LVN in Polk.
Laurie, which of my screens do you see?
I see the smaller screen. when I see the notes also. So, yep, there you are. Okay, well, that was relatively short, and I know we're starting, people may still be catching a snack or whatever, but they'll be popping back in. I want to keep us on time for this. And we did get a question in the chat room for Dr. Kenworthy, and he's probably going to be talking about this in the presentation, but someone asked if he could please comment briefly on testing results for Citra Blue. Last year was still being tested, and our community is currently considering Palmetto versus Citra Blue. So I'm sure that will be covered in here. And we also have a question about best time to install new lawns, and Dr. Unruh can certainly be covering that later. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kenworthy.
Okay, hello. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Henry, for arranging this. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Obviously, a very important topic that the industry and communities are dealing with. And so today, I'm not going to add too much to what's been presented on actual LVN, but maybe try to explain a little bit about some of the confusions with cultivars and what's recommended for replacement, and why something may not be on a list for recommendation when it doesn't get LVN. Just trying to clear up a few things. So origins, cultivars, and sourcing of St. Augustine grass in Florida. So we're going to start out with, this is the worldwide map of where St. Augustine grass is either native or introduced. If you see over here on the left, St. Augustine grass is in the genus Stenotrophem, and the species down here at the bottom is secundatum. There are other species in the genus. We won't worry about those. This is St. Augustine grass, Stenotrophem secundatum. And what's really important, and something I like to highlight, is this world map showing where St. Augustine grass is native and where it has been introduced and then naturalized. Really important here that the state of Florida, the Kew Botanical Gardens is one of the world authorities on adaptations of plants, and the Kew Botanical Gardens lists that St. Augustine grass is a native plant to Florida. I think that's really important for us to understand, and why this species is so well adapted for use in the state. So just a couple of things here. I'm not going to go through this entire slide, just a couple of points here, but the history of St. Augustine grass as a turf grass in the Florida is really a history of the turf grass industry in our state. This goes all the way back to 1880, where we have the first documentation of production and planting of sod, which was actually St. Augustine grass at the time. And I'm not going to go through these other bullet points that discuss some of the histories and timeline of the Florida turf industry, which really all relate back to St. Augustine grass. Of importance, bitter blue came onto the Florida turf grass industry market in the 1930s. At the time, it was considered superior to Florida common. It had a blue-green appearance, dense growth, finer texture. It was supposedly discovered in Fort Myers and given the name bitter blue because cattle rejected it for grazing. Other St. Augustine grasses were used for grazing at the time, and the cattle rejected bitter blue potentially because of the taste of it. In 1947, there was a flooding from a hurricane, and bitter blue sod fields were disruptive and replaced with virtually anything that could be found, but still continued to be sold and marketed as bitter blue. And then that gets us to 1972 and the release of Floratam St. Augustinegrass, very important to this state and our turfgrass industry. Floratam was released because it was resistant at the time to the southern chinch bug. Of course, we know that Floratam is no longer resistant and very susceptible to chinch bugs. Really, the reason that Floratam was released, somewhat unique, is that it was resistant or is resistant to another virus called St. Augustine decline. The SAD virus was destroying the Texas landscape and sod industries in the 1960s, and they were scrambling at the time trying to identify replacements in their industry, and they tested several grasses from the University of Florida, and Floratam, the experimental line, came out of that process. And because of a fear for SAD to come into Florida, Floratam was propagated and utilized in Florida, and obviously very well adapted to Florida conditions and has done well for many reasons. But anyway, somewhat unique that its development or evaluation was selected for its resistance to another virus, and now it is the grass that seems to be so susceptible to a new virus. Other good things about Floratam, it's very resistant to large patch disease, one of the most problematic diseases of St. Augustine grass and of zoysia grass as well. There's been a lot of talk about zoysia grass in the chat. Floratam does not have good shade tolerance compared to other St. Augustine grasses, and it is more susceptible to winter injury and winter kill, particularly in the northern part of the state. Floratam is important because it is the foundation of the Florida lawn and sod industries. We estimate that there's 30 to 40,000 acres of it in production. And we do need to restate and continue to restate that Floratam is still a very good choice in many areas of our state where LVN is not a concern. So this leaves us with the following list of St. Augustine grasses that are available in the state. We have our standard cultivars, Floratam, Bitter Blue, Seville, Raleigh, Classic, and Palmetto. And then there are three newer varieties. Provista, I believe, came into the market in 2017, 2018. Citra Blue is entering the market in 2019 and 2020, and really just beginning to get into the market even in 2021. And Armada is another brand new grass. Those that are in bolded, Bitter Blue, Seville, Raleigh, Classic, and Palmetto, these are all cultivars that are recognized as suitable replacements for Floratam in LVN sites. This is a little bit different from other information today that may have been more restrictive, but these grasses do not get LVN, and so would be considered as suitable replacements for Floratam, okay? Evaluations are ongoing for Provista and Citra Blue. There have been questions in the chat box. These are have both been planted in LVN affected sites. Evaluations continue to take place. I can't comment on Provista, but I can comment on Citra Blue as it's a release out of my program. We're going through the fourth winter for the earliest plantings of Citra Blue, which are it's a small number, okay? And so far, Citra Blue has performed favorably and looks like it's doing well, but when you consider the number of installs that are really small numbers compared to the thousands and millions of homes that have been planted in these cultivars over the many, many years, we just don't have a lot of evidence to make major claims about Citra Blue. So I'm comfortable to say that evaluations are positive. To date, we haven't had any confirmed case of LVN in Citra Blue, but the numbers of installs that are several years old are just too small in order to have extreme confidence because something could change, and we don't know that for sure. As Dr. Harmon pointed out, it's difficult to predict the future. We did get many more installs this last year. Several hundred lawns are now installed with Citra Blue in the areas of the state that are affected by LVN. So we'll have far more evidence in the future, but those landscapes are now only a year or less old at this point. But why is all this important? Why is it important to understand these different cultivars? And this gets us to this point, the question here, death of lawns from LVN after replacement of Floratam. So why would a lawn that's been replaced after death of LVN to Floratam, why would a lawn then die? And so there's two reasons. One, that the sod that was installed was contaminated, or possibly the sod that was installed was actually Floratam and not something else. And why could that happen? And that's could be to contamination or to supply chain issues. So I'm going to try to discuss these a little bit. So first we'll talk about contamination. If you look at this picture, it doesn't take a trained eye to see that this plant here has a really thick purple stolon. And the plant here has a thinner stolon that's also greener. And you see that the branching is different on this plant compared to this stolon above. This was a picture that I took in a sod field of Floratam. Floratam should be very resistant to large patch, one of the primary diseases affecting St. Augustinegrass, but I drove across this or by this field, knew that it was Floratam, but saw a large patch in the field. So I stopped and I was able to confirm why I was seeing large patch, because this field happens to be contaminated. So you could have a sod field of Floratam that's contaminated, or you could have a sod field of Palmetto or Bitter Blue or Seville that's contaminated with Floratam. These things can go either way. And so this can then lead to problems with the installation success if you bought Bitter Blue or if you bought Palmetto and it was highly contaminated with Floratam, then the chances of that installation or the success of that installation are going to be very low in an LVN site. And we've seen several instances of this occurring, and I believe some of the people in the chat rooms have commented where they've had cases where Palmetto has not done well or Bitter Blue has not done well. And in every one of those cases that we've been able to follow up with, now there have been cases we haven't been able to follow up with, but in every case where we have followed up, collected samples, we have found Floratam to be the dominant grass that was actually installed and then subsequently died a second time due to LVN. In every case where we have selected where someone has thought that Palmetto has died from LVN, we have confirmed so far in every case that it was actually Floratam that contained LVN and died. In every sample we've looked at where we have brought things back, grown them in the greenhouse, and then done DNA analysis of those samples, it has always been Floratam that has had LVN. Palmetto has never had LVN. Seville has never had LVN. Either. Now, the case with Bitter Blue is more complex because it is so old, and often one Bitter Blue that you buy from one grower is not the same as a Bitter Blue that you may get from another grower. That is a problem with Bitter Blue. But what I have told growers, and I've also told customers and homeowner associations out there, because several people are very happy with the Bitter Blue that they have sourced. If you're happy with it, it's performing well for you, then there's no reason not to continue to sell or buy that Bitter Blue if it's working for you in your situation. But just be aware that any grass that is purchased or bought other than Floratam is likely to have issues with large patch. And large patch occurs this time of the year, the same time that we see those cases of LVN occurring more frequently. So the problem there is that people may be confusing what is death due to a fungal disease such as large patch with potential problems with LVN. So you've got to be certain about the problem that's occurring with your grass so that you can manage it appropriately. Why does contamination occur? Particularly, so we've got these different grasses or cultivars of St. Augustine grass listed here. These cultivars of St. Augustine grass are all very fertile and produce viable seed and can easily contaminate a sod farm. These grasses won't as easily contaminate. Bitter blue, Floratam, Provista, and Citra blue have poor fertility. They will set no seed or very little seed in a sod setting. So they should remain cleaner over time, but because bitter blue is so old that we see different bitter blues out there on the market. These grasses, Raleigh, Seville, Classic, Palmetto, and Armada, do produce fertile seed. However, I tend to see that these sod fields are cleaner than say bitter blue or Floratam. Now, Provista and Citra blue tend to be very clean sod fields. Number one, Citra blue is very new on the market, and Provista has the advantage of being able to apply glyphosate. So those sod fields should be very clean. But just trying to help you understand why a sod field can get contaminated. The seed can get moved around by animals, by birds, by equipment, any number of mechanisms the seed can get dispersed. And certainly we have fertile seed produced by several cultivars of St. Augustine grass. And so how can we help to combat the contamination issue on the sod farm? They should be mowing frequently and mow short enough to remove seed heads. A good sod grower will have barriers between fields, and they'll clean equipment between fields as well. So there are several things that can be done on the grower end to prevent contamination. Genetic analysis of sod fields, Dr. Harmon alluded to some of our efforts of working with growers, and 16 farms have voluntarily submitted samples for genetic analysis. This was both to confirm the grasses of St. Augustine grass that they have in their fields, and also to look for the presence of the sugarcane mosaic virus, which causes LVN. So all farms submitted several samples of Floratam. Between the 16 farms, 52 samples were submitted. 8 farms submitted bitter blue samples. Those 8 farms submitted 13 samples of bitter blue. All samples were tested for the presence of the sugarcane mosaic virus. And then they were also analyzed for their DNA to determine which cultivar was actually there. And so we can faithfully say that no samples from farms were positive for sugarcane mosaic virus, the causal virus of lethal viral necrosis. And we can say that each farm submitted samples that were DNA true to type for Floratam. Again, the situation for bitter blue is significantly more complicated, and several of those samples that were submitted as bitter blue did come back as Floratam. So you do need to be careful when you're buying bitter blue, but as I've said, if you had success with your source of bitter blue, replacing Floratam that was killed by LVN, there's no reason for you to not continue using that source. And if a sod grower has had success with their bitter blue, there's no reason for them to not continue to sell that as well. Okay, the second situation that causes problems in landscape, supply chain issues. There's several different steps between the installation site or a homeowner that has requested sod and the farm. There can be sod brokers involved. There can be installers or landscapers involved. Unless you have contacted a farm directly, there are going to be middlemen involved, and possibly more than one, and situations can occur. Right now, there's a tremendous building wave in our state, so demand for sod is high and inventories are short on farms. So what's specified may not be available. And we've all seen these cases where we have 10 people in a row, and the first person whispers a sentence into the ear of the next person, and they whisper it into the ear of the person next to them. And by the time you get to the 10th person, the sentence has completely changed, right? So if a homeowner has requested a certain cultivar of St. Augustinegrass, by the time that reaches the grower, the sentence or the request may have changed to whatever you have available. That's what I'll buy, and that may end up what comes to the end user. So in some cases, quality becomes secondary to price when demand is high. Sometimes an order is made for sod, but the job site's not ready, so that load may get rerouted. Sod from one job may be used to fill a shortage on another, or start an install that's finished later, unintentionally resulting in mixed cultivars being installed in that lawn. In some cases, if lawns are installed in different dates, then sod from different farms or lawns with a cultivar other than what was expected may be installed. So these supply chain issues are real, and they can lead to different grasses being installed in a landscape, or in fact, a different grass than what was requested being installed in the landscape. So what can you do? Okay, what are the roles of residents and lawn care professionals? Again, let's all recognize that Floratam is still a very good option in most of our state. What can you do if you're a lawn care professional? Establish relationships with reputable farms and or resellers of grass. Go visit the farm. Every grower that I know that is a good, reputable grower will welcome you on their farm to go see their fields. They like having that face-to-face interaction. They like to be able to shake your hands when you come onto their farm. Go visit their farm, develop that relationship, make sure you're getting good grass on your end. This is an extremely important component to ensuring that the end user has a satisfiable experience. Make sure you educate yourself about the different cultivars. Be specific about cultivars when you're sourcing into an LVN impacted area, and then educate your clients so they understand why you're recommending something and why a price difference may be worth it. Verify what you hear. The science is evolving and word of mouth can be wrong. Feel free to contact your county agents in LVN affected areas. Contact Dr. Harmon, contact myself. Avoid mixing loads when working in areas that have LVN. Don't rely, okay, you have finished a job and you've got another job, leftover sod from the previous job, and you've just decided to take that over to the new job. Avoid that if at all possible. Make sure you're installing that site with sod from the same load from the same grower, and you'll have better success. Stay up to date on the research and movement of the virus. There have been lots of questions about sourcing sod. I highly suggest visiting floridaturf.com. There will be maps that you can click on for different regions of the state to find growers near your area, and you can then click on the growers and see which species and cultivars they're producing. There was also a link for sod solutions placed in the chat that will be able to give you verified growers of palmetto. So these are important resources available to you. And then the last thing, of course, these are the cultivars available for purchase in the state. How are these managed for genetic purity? Because Floratam, Bitter Blue, Seville, and Raleigh are so old, there is nothing in place to ensure their genetic integrity. Now, most growers know what Floratam looks like, and most growers are growing Floratam. There may be some contamination in the fields, but they do know what Floratam looks like. The identification of Bitter Blue, Seville, Raleigh, Palmetto, Classic gets to be more difficult, but the identification of Floratam is fairly straightforward. Palmetto, there is a licensing program and an inspection program through Sod Solutions to help ensure genetic integrity. Classic, fumigation is required for new plantings to ensure purity, but there's no licensing program for Classic. Armada is a new grass on the market that's licensed from the Dig Plant Company. I don't know anything about an inspection process. I'm honestly not even sure that Armada is commercially available at this point, but I'm sure it will be soon. So it's just something to be on the lookout for. Provista is licensed from the Scotch company. It's glyphosate resistant, so that helps to prevent contamination from other cultivars. And then Citra Blue, licensed from the turfgrass producers of Florida. A production field of Citra Blue is required to have been planted from a certified class of sod. Certified classes of sod are foundation, registered, or certified. What does this mean? This means that there's a third-party inspection agent that is inspecting the field for genetic purity. And this is in place to really provide some insurance for the grower to make sure they are growing and selling what they bought and have planned to grow and sell. And it's also there to protect the end user so that the end user has some certainty that what they're purchasing is the true to type sod. So the certification program is an expense that the sod growers have to go through, but it's there to ensure the genetic integrity of the variety. And Citra Blue is the only one of these cultivars that has the certification process. So hopefully I stayed within my time, and that's all I have for today. Happy to answer any questions over the chat, or feel free to send me an email here at kenworth@ufl.edu. Follow me on Twitter at KE_Kenworthy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kenworthy. There are a couple questions. I think you've actually answered those questions, but in the interest of time, we're going to move on. So next up, we're going to be talking about establishing turf, because of course you have to replace the old turf with new turf. And here to talk about that, I think he's here, is Dr. Unruh. Are you there?
I am here.
Okay, and Dr. Kenworthy, if you can, okay, thank you. We'll move on.
All right, if you can all give me a thumbs up, tell me you can see some slides that say something about establishing turf. Woo-hoo, we're good. Well, off we go. It's good to join you on this brisk, cool morning. I'm located up in the panhandle of Florida, and it was about 29 degrees this morning and pretty heavy frost. But St. Augustinegrass is screaming right now. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about some renovation best practices, and then throw a little herbicide cultural care options, and then some post-installation care. And so you've had the stage set for you this morning, and talked about this LVN thing. And like, I guess kind of some of the renovation strategy really kind of depends on how severe is the problem. And, when do you want to bite the bullet, or are you going to, do a slow fade? And so we'll look into some of these pictures that you've likely already seen this morning, an area like this here in the image on the right, showing a fairly large area, and dead is dead. We're not the Messiah. We're not going to be bringing things back to life. You see the situation here on the left where it's not quite as dead. And so again, in time, I think what the evidence is telling us is that it's going to succumb to this thing. And so, at what point do you really make this thing happen? So I guess the question is how severe is the problem, and that needs to be answered. And so when we think about kind of some renovation strategies, this whole complete replacement with a new sod, Dr. Kenworthy shared, what are some of those varieties? I saw a question pop up, and about zoysia grass, and zoysia clearly would be an option, to go into an LVN infected site. And some are choosing to do that. If you go that route, you probably ought to attend a zoysia grass management workshop, which we haven't done one of those in the COVID environment, but maybe we ought to do another round of those, because zoysia management is very different. I don't think it's any harder or any less, easier, but it's just very different. And so this complete lawn replacement allows some fixes to some of the other problems that may exist, and we'll elaborate on those a bit. And it's a more costly option in the short term. Plugging new grasses into existing sites, maybe that picture we had there on the left, maybe it wasn't quite so bad. You maybe get a new variety of whatever, Zoysia or St. Augustine, and plug it into those. And so it's a slower approach to a new lawn. Those site problems, other than the LVN, are not going to be addressed in this plugging approach, and it is a less costly option in the short term. Long term, maybe not so. So you decide it's time for a change. Now what? And we don't get the opportunity for a redo very often, so we want to make sure we do it right. On the front end. And that's what makes turf management so much different than, other agriculture. And, when we look at managing crops, we go out there and plow a field every year, and assuming, it's an annual, and we can make some pretty big adjustments beforehand. But once the grass is already there, once the site has been established, you don't, like I said, don't have the opportunity to do a redo. So we'll look at some site assessment, and then this complete renovation, cleaning and regrading, looking at soil analysis, and I'm going to unpack each of these bulleted items here. Irrigation system audit and why that's so critically important. Soil amendments if needed. And then some deep tillage, some final grading, planting, irrigation, post-plant clearance. So we have an LVN infected site. Let's go in and do a site assessment. Let's figure out, was the lawn healthy before LVN ever knocked on its door? Chances are it wasn't. And so we look at some of these scenarios. And so part of this site assessment, we end up, this is obviously a commercial landscape, but this is just stupid here. This is at the local Chick-fil-A. This little patch of grass here, St. Augustine, for whatever reason, this is a chinch bug magnet. And it's often, it's humorous to me because it will about to, succumb to death with chinch bugs, and then they'll nurse it back to health, and then here it comes again. But this little scab of grass, you're going to maintain it with a string trimmer. You're not getting your big 50-inch mower up on it. And so let's just eliminate the grass in a situation like this, and expand this planting bed here. Situations like this. Now, this isn't St. Augustine. This is a different variety of grass, but most landscapers and lawn care companies, commercial or even the homeowner now, there's that mower envy thing going on, and so you got to buy a bigger mower. It's got more horsepower, but slopes like this with a mower like this, you can't maintain those. And so obviously maybe coming in and doing some reshaping and regrading, and obviously this was here for some water, stormwater movement site. So again, assessing that site as well. And then for whatever reason, people think we ought to be able to grow grass underneath, heavy dense shade. And the reality is it ain't happening. And so we have tools in the trade now to quantify, is this a situation where you ought to be having grass? And, when it's hard to take a picture in the middle of the day because it's so dark, probably not going to grow turf grass very well in this scenario. And so these are kinds of things. This doesn't have anything to do with LVN. This has everything to do with proper site assessment as well. And then we want to come in and regrade. So we made some decisions. We've got to do some changes. And so we clean and regrade the site. And I think the best approach there is literally bring the sod cutter in and strip the old grass off. I know people are cheap and they don't want to spend any money, but this is pretty critical. To get the old out and then be able to till and prepare that soil properly. It gets a little more complex. We obviously have some valve boxes in here and things that we have to work around. But I think the best approach is to literally come in, remove the grass that's gone. And I think it's best to do that with sod cutter and take a little bit of organic and soil with it. Regrading the landscape does simply not mean placing soil over the top of the existing grass and weeds. This is so common. It's dead, sunken in a little bit. Let's just throw some dirt on it and smooth it out. And so, this is just dirt, fill dirt that they've put it right over the top of existing soil, and not a good approach, not a best management practice. And then the site should be weed free prior to sodding. They call me the paparazzi of turf because I drive around taking pictures of stupid. And it, I've sent a few people through the windshield almost. I slam on the brakes fast when I see pictures like this just waiting to be taken. And I watched this site. I drove by this place often on my way to the coffee shop, and they literally laid the new sod right over the top. They didn't kill anything. They didn't take the sod cutter through there. They laid that grass right over the top of those weeds growing and all. And so, this is pretty common practice. And so I'm sure everybody on the call today would never do something like this, but we got to get rid of these weeds prior to sodding. Well, that brings up an interesting dilemma, because we see out there now this this fear of glyphosate or Roundup, and you turn on the news and you see the ads running. Have you ever sprayed Roundup? Well, you're a prime candidate to rake in millions of dollars in this class action lawsuit, and we have entire workshops on glyphosate. But I can tell you that it's the decisions to not use glyphosate are not founded in good hard science. But I also know that you're under some constraints at those people that are simply not going to allow you to use glyphosate. So what are your options? And so we did a little demo a few years ago looking at some options. And so, we had Roundup plus Fusilade, which is kind of your standard mix. And then Cheetah Pro, that is glufosinate. Sounds like glyphosate, but it's a very different product. And glufosinate and these are all non-selective products. So they're going to kill whatever they touch. Well, they're going to burn whatever they touch. So we put Cheetah Pro in there, and then Reward, which is diquat, and then this whole list down here, Scythe, which is pelargonic acid, and Axe and Final Sand and Green Googler, Avenger AG. So these, if you were to get on the internet and do a search for glyphosate alternatives, these are products that will pop up here. These products here, from about here down, are organic, which doesn't mean you can eat them. But they are, some of the most deadly chemicals we have in the world are all natural. So anyway, we put these out, and you can see here 1, 2, 3. So the untreated check Roundup, Fusilade, and then down the line. And this is just a few days after application, 24 hours. This little Zoom window in my way. 24 hours after treatment, you can see how fast these products have a burn down. And over here, the glyphosate or the Roundup plus Fusilade and the Cheetah Pro really haven't even started working yet. And so we come back a week later, and we can see here that number 2, that our glyphosate is starting to do what it does well, kill things. The Cheetah Pro, glufosinate, is killing things. But notice 4, 5, 6, and 7, and 8, 9, all of these products, we're back to green grass. And so one hour or one day before, you've got brown grass. 1 week later, we're back to green grass. And so these things are contact herbicides. They're going to burn what is there, but they're not going to have much effect on a weed, a perennial weed. And if you've got a little crabgrass out there or something like that, you're going to burn them down. Notice as well that almost all of these products from 5 down, they are a different rate structure. It's a percent. And so these are solutions that are going out 100%. So like this Green Gobbler product here, 30%, it is a 100%. So you're spraying this stuff straight out of the jug. 14% spray volume. So it's different than putting a quart per, in your spray tank. It's, you're putting 100 gallons in this case, 14%. So you got to kind of do a little math there with these products. Now, we look at these, and this is where the rubber hits the road. Glyphosate, Fusilade, it kills things, and it's only $2.20 per 1,000 square feet. Okay. Glufosinate will kill some things, and it's $2.41. Get down here to Scythe and Axe and Final Sand, you're looking at $13 per 1,000, $12. Look at this one, Green Googler, $45 per 1,000 square feet. And so people say, well, that's just vinegar. Green Googler it's acetic acid, but it is a 30% acetic acid, but you can buy it on Amazon. And so now here's the deal with these products here. The personal protective equipment is essential. It's interesting as I travel around the state and I see a lot of landscapers out there and they'll have the backpack, spraying cracks and spraying, beds. It's oftentimes you won't see even, the bare minimum PPE, the gloves or, long sleeves or anything like that. They just pop that backpack on and go. These products here, you better wear some PPE because the burn potential for your skin is really high with these products. They're organic, but they will cause some serious injury and they're pretty darn expensive. And so again, if you utilize some of these things in, for burn down and some contact weed control, you got some grasses popping up in the beds or something like that, they might be an acceptable, solution for that. But you're trying to eliminate one grass in your landscape and switch it out with another. I'd go back and use the good stuff. And so then we come to this point of soil analysis, and this is pretty key. Our soils are quite variable all over the state. We know that as landscapes age, we get a lot of organic matter build up in these landscapes. And so pHs can be all over the place depending on whether you're using some reclaimed water and just what are the sources in there. And so we can make some adjustments here. We identify what those adjustments are through a soil test. Making, and again, because we're renovating, we have the ability to make some pretty dramatic changes. Phosphorus is a key one here. We've got, environmental concerns with phosphorus and bottom line, if you get a soil test back and that phosphorus is at 10 or greater, then just skip it. We don't need to do much there. And then the other nutrients will come back after the fact once we have a little grass down on the ground. Irrigation uniformity is essential. The person that said, is zoysia grass an option? Zoysia is an option, but zoysia, and that's what this picture is. This is a picture of zoysia grass. It'll tattle on you if there's any irregularities in your irrigation system uniformity. And so, in this system here, these shrubs weren't there when the sprinkler systems were put in. So we see some heads are impacting, the water's just not getting where it needs to be. The only way you can do an irrigation uniformity test is with catch cans. And I don't care whether you buy these fancy catch cans or buy cat food or tuna fish and dump this food out and use those cans. Just because your eyeballs see sprinklers moving and you've got head-to-head coverage and they're, all lapping, none of us are that good until you put a catch can on the ground and quantify how much water lands at that spot. You cannot make an assessment. And so we put the catch cans out, we run it. And if there's much more than, 10, 15, 20% non-uniformity, in other words, the volume of water in each of those cans shouldn't vary by much. If it does, we've got to do some irrigation system, nozzle replacement and cracks me up, landscapers, well, the mowing people come along and a head stuck up and they hit it off, knock it off with the mower. They go back to the truck and, because they carry a box of sprinkler parts, and it's a black one and they go put it in the ground. They didn't bother to to see how many gallons per minute. It was black and the one I hit was black. So it's going in the ground. That's a purple one. We'll put a purple in it. And so over time, even these things can get out of kilter. I was down in Central Florida one time and I saw this guy. I took this picture because, turf grass gets blamed for using too much water and it just annoys me when people say that. But I was looking at these sprinkler heads over here, took the picture, got back and I was looking at this picture and here's this dude over here, standing there looking and assessing the situation. Probably wondering if this was LVN. No, it's a broken sprinklers. Didn't have anything to do with the disease. And so we did pretty good trying to water the sidewalk though. And so here we're doing this renovation, so we've got an opportunity to address some soil amendments. And so there's tremendous evidence that poor soils can be improved by adding a good quality compost. And so we've got a ton of research at the University of Florida really looking at some of these things. Now, especially as you get further down in the state where many of you are, especially in some of these really old established neighborhoods, you may have a ton of organic matter in your soils already. You might not. New developments generally not, but if it's a 20, 30-year-old landscape and you dig it in and that soil looks real rich and you send the soil test back, and it comes back with 6% organic matter, let's not add any compost to situations like that. there's a QR screen or code popped up here on this. So if you've got your handy cell phone with you, you can take a picture of this. Laurie or somebody may want to pop that right quick and then post that into the chat. But this will take you to a publication that Dr. Eben Bean from the University of Florida put out on guidance for amending urban soils with organic amendments. So there's a whole document now that tells you kind of the nuts and bolts of organic matter and whether or not you should incorporate it into that. You can also Google the 2021 Urban Landscape Summit and on YouTube. Go to YouTube and type in 2021 Urban Landscape Summit, and you'll see a presentation that was given on this subject of incorporating organic amendments into the urban landscape. And so again, if you've got real rich soils, don't go down this road. But if you're in a newer development that is struggling and the soils are poor to start with, you've done that soil test, then come back and look at some of this as well. Again, this presentation and that manual that is referenced there, Dr. Bean provides some guidance for amending these urban soils. And so you can see where they're coming along and spreading some of these composts in there, and then incorporation is key. And we want to try to incorporate that amendment as deep as we can. And then coming back and they get into, again, the quantity of compost that is needed as well. And so then we come to this kind of deep tillage and final grading, and a lot of folks have this idea that, Florida sandy soils don't compact, and that's simply not true. Our sandy soils can compact tremendously. And so again, this opportunity to come in and establish a new lawn gives us the opportunity to go in. We're going to get the old junk off, and then we're going to rototill that soil and just improve it as well. And so that's going to improve the speed and the depth of rooting. And again, if we've added some amendments, we're going to incorporate those as well. And then we want to final grade it and making sure that we're adhering to, that the final grade allows that water to move away from, any structure and flows to the areas of drainage basins and catch basins as well. And then lightly compress the soil to prevent footprints of more than about 1/2 inch. And, different people will use different types of things, but rollers or whatnot to come in and kind of firm that soil up. And so, if you're out there getting ready to lay sod and you're leaving big footprints into that freshly prepared soil, it's too fluffy. We need to firm that up a little bit before we come and drop some grass down. And so we've looked at these things and all of these site assessments and the renovations and using good herbicides to kill the weeds that are there, looking at a soil test, and then some irrigation system analysis, and all of these are very important, but that irrigation system analysis thing, that's critically important. And then we mentioned the soil amendments, and so we're coming down to a time where we're going to start putting some grass on the ground and following some of those recommendations that Dr. Kenworthy and others have provided. Sodding is obviously has got a lot of advantages. You can come in and establish the area pretty dang quick. It's the instant lawn, fairly uniform stand, fewer weeds, assuming you're purchasing sod from a reputable grower. It's low bid is just that, low bid. Probably be cautious of that. They put a new hotel in Gainesville, one that I stay at often, and of course they put some bahia grass in, and I literally was walking from the parking lot to the hotel, and there was this great big old cow patty right in the middle of the grass that had been laid. And I looked around and I didn't see any steers, and so it had to have come with the sod, and so things like that. So in the time of planting, especially down in South Florida, you can plant grass 365 days a year. Fit these sod pieces together as tightly as possible. I've seen, and you've seen, landscapes that folks have come in and I don't know if they've got a contest going or what, but let's see how big a gap we can leave in there. And they're trip hazards, but there shouldn't be a trip hazard when the sod is laid. Those pieces should all be nicely fitted together. And then something that's often not done is coming back and rolling that sod. And that makes a big difference, putting some kind of roller back over that surface, and it just compresses that sod against that soil that you've prepared as well. Now plugging, and this is a different ballgame. Plugging is planting these, mature 2 to 4 inch plugs of turf into the soil, generally somewhere around, 6 to 18 inch centers. Obviously, the closer you put these things together, the faster they're going to establish. But plug trays are very different than buying a pallet of sod and taking a machete to it and cutting squares. Okay. Notice these plugs, they're no different than a potted plant that you're going to buy down at the nursery. This is a potted plant. It has an intact root system. And when you pop that plug out of the tray and you put it in the ground, there's roots, and those roots are going to then take off and run and establish it themselves, versus just going and taking a slab of sod and cutting it into little pieces. Look at the bottom of the slab of sod, there aren't any roots. Okay, so it's got to establish roots as well. So plugs are quite a bit more expensive, but again, they're it's a potted plant that you're going to transplant into the landscape, and they tend to do much better than just taking that machete to a pile of or a pallet of sod and plugging it around. Again, closer together, the faster it's going to establish. The farther apart, the slower. Now you've got one of those. Go back to that original picture of the LVN. And,
if I can just make a comment, we're running kind of short on time.
Yep.
So just wanted to let you know.
Yep. And so you can see here, this is August 7th, and by September 27th, so what is that, 6, 7 weeks, we've gone from plugs to complete coverage. Not always is that fast, but and then there's charts on there. Different plug suppliers will tell you, how many plugs you need based on how many centers you're going to do. And then post-planting care, we want to make sure we keep a little irrigation on the site. Not a lot of irrigation, a little irrigation. Don't allow it to get too dry or too wet. Too wet, you're going to be sending samples to Dr. Harmon, not for LVN, but for every other disease that comes along. Gently stressing the turf doesn't hurt it. And then begin mowing as soon as the sod or the plugs offer a little resistance to the plug. And then this last point down here is really critical. Let's avoid that fertilizer for 30 to 60 days following planting. There's plenty of nutrition that's there in that disturbance process, and so just let it wait a little bit and allow some roots to grow, allow that plant to get established, and then off we go. And I think we've covered all of these points. And so with that, my contact information is up there should you have any questions. And I will sign off soon.
Okay, thank you very much. And we're going to go right to Henry, who is our commercial horticulture agent down in Miami-Dade, who's going to talk a little bit about what's going on down in that further south from where I am, and also talk about some frequently asked questions. And hopefully the specialists can stay on, because we have had a lot of questions about zoysiagrass and other things, but we want to make sure Henry gets some time to talk. So we're going to go straight to him. And Dr. Unruh, if you could stop sharing, we'll Henry, you're on.
All right.
Here you are.
Good morning, everybody. Can you see my slides over there?
Yeah, just go to full screen.
All right. You see now? All right. So I don't want to be between you and the lunch. I know we are getting close to the end of the program. Well, this was amazing information for all the specialists. So I don't have too much to add of this. Let me try to show you this. We took some pictures here from the same homeowner association. This was one association in the Homestead area. And you can see here from December 2018.
Henry,
Hello? Hello?
You're good.
You're good? Okay.
You're good, Henry. Yeah.
All right. So you can see this is the same location here from 2018 to 2022. This is a homeowner association. You can see, for example, in 2018, you can see as Romina said before, you can see the tires of the mowing machine. So this place in 3 years ago, we already know that they have little virus necrosis here in San Augustinegrass. 2019, people were very happy because they thought, the disease is not it's not causing so many damage, but you can start seeing a lot of weeds. So if you see some weeds over there, it's a bad sign that the grass is dying and the weeds are taking over. And 2020, you can see that the deterioration is more. And this was like 2 weeks ago, you're going to see a lot of weeds. So maybe 95 or 90% of the site is covered by weeds. So again, this is what Laurie said before. I mean, how much the homeowner association are willing to deal with that. They want to replace the whole thing, or they are okay with the weeds. They want to see only green stuff, etc. So again, the perception is very important. How much money they want to invest in the landscape is I know is very, very important. But in this case, I mean, they are good with the weeds. So they're not going to replace the whole thing. So again, every homeowner association is different. I know people here are investing millions of dollars, replacing the San Augustinegrass. So again, this is different. We do a lot of site visits to people calling that, my grass is dying, so we went to the place and we see it. And in this specific place, this is the second time the homeowner replaced the grass. So again, unfortunately, the homeowner didn't have any information about, so they replaced with Floratam again, and again it's dying. So it's very sad seeing these things to happen because this costs money, and grass is very expensive right now, as you can know. Again, big homeowner association, you're going to see this. This is the year number 3, maybe. So maybe by next year, everything's gone. So it's difficult to give it bad news. Again, and this is the why we are doing this type of seminars, to give it to you the information. In the majority of the cases, I really say to the pest control guys, be upfront with the customers. If the CPCO, the pest control guys or landscapers, they know they have it, this, you need to communicate and you need to educate the homeowners or the homeowner association as soon as possible, because they expect that nothing is going to happen. And they expect the pest control guys or the landscapers that are going to cure the problem, or they're going to solve the problem. And this is, unfortunately, it's not going to be the case. So be honestly is very, very important. Yeah, upfront, be honest with the guys, be honest with the customer. And this is going to, help a lot with the educational thing. Many people are asking, can we use artificial grass? And that's another topic for another day, I guess. I don't know. This is an open question. But many people are looking for artificial grass. Pros and cons. I am not an expert in this by any means, but some people are looking for that type of, feedback. So this is my email, my phone number, my contact info. If you want to contact me. Again, I don't have too much to share. But as Dr. Agassi says, we are expecting a very bad year for Miami-Dade County. This is year number 4 or 5, so that's could be, you know, very, you know, a lot of things going to happen. Palm Beach is ahead of us. So I know in Palm Beach, many communities are losing a lot of grasses, and Laurie has a lot of experience with that. So I don't know, I don't have too much to add. I mean, this was you have a lot of information over there to digest in very short time. So I open this to questions. Laurie, yours.
Thank you. I do know that maybe Dr. Unruh, if he's still on, can speak to the artificial turf grass issue, and also maybe go over a little bit more some of the differences in terms of management and issues with zoysia grass. Those are 2 things that I think we could cover in the last couple minutes before CEUs for professionals go around. So I'm gonna, you know, ask Dr. Unruh to make some final comments.
Sure. So the artificial turf thing is out there, and we just literally 2 or 3 weeks ago, and Laurie, maybe you can find that EDIS. There's a brand new.
Yeah, I showed it.
Okay, you did good.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we had a lot of folks wanting us to, you know, basically say artificial turf was Florida friendly. Well, and so this article goes in and spells out, you know, what those concerns are. Here's where Bryan stands on artificial turf. It is not a replacement for a natural grass system. There are some very small situations where I might consider using artificial turf. And that's in these kind of 0 lot line conditions where, you know, they got big trees and you literally have, you know, 3 foot and you've got to have something green there. You want something green there. And you've tried natural grass and it doesn't work. That might, you know, be an option for you. The reality is that the positive attributes of plants are not captured in plastic. And so groundwater recharge, cooling effect of natural plants, that's not there. And in fact, especially if you're considering, you know, artificial turf in a larger expanse, you have to water it because if you're going to use it, because it gets blasted hot. I mean, crazy hot, 3rd degree burns hot. And that is a major, major concern. And if you think about it, you know, if people are walking their dogs or whatnot, and animals, you know, happen to relieve themselves, the microbe system that is below a living organism, a living plant system, can process those that manure and urine that lands on it. Artificial turf, no, not going to happen. So I'm not, you know, big advocate of it. It's got some real challenges as well. As far as management, the team has just finished revising our zoysia grass publication, and so just in that publication, there's a chart in there that kind of compares the differences between, say, zoysia and St. Augustine. Here's the biggest one, or the biggest couple. First of all, zoysia grass, 2-inch mowing height or less. I mean, and that's a big one. You violate that, and you're going to start to see some problems creep in with zoysia grass. And I'm going to keep it kind of within the coarser textured zoysias, and so terms like Empire and Jammer or Icon. Some of these coarser textured zoysias, and so 2-inch mowing height or less. Fertilizer inputs are half of what St. Augustine should be. And so if you're a landscaper, or you as a landscaper going in and managing a zoysia grass lawn, you got to have that height of cut down 2 inches. And then that fertilizer has to be considerably less. If you fertilize it, that thing will grow like a monster. And what ultimately happens is when you go to show up to mow, or if the mowing crew comes to mow, this thing's growing too much and you're mowing it at that 2 inches, it will start to scout. The mowing crew generally just sneaks up and, you know, raises that height of cut up a little bit so it's not scalping. Well, then this thing starts getting out of control in a hurry. The other side are some cultural practices like vertical mowing or power raking, so dethatching zoysia grass. Zoysias have a real tendency, they've got a lot of stem tissue, above ground stems and below ground stems. And if it's improperly managed, the thatch within zoysia grass will get out ahead of you. And it harbors all kinds of good disease organisms and insects that can have some problems. When zoysia is good, it is really, really good. When zoysia is bad, it generally is really, really bad. And so, but again, we'll have that new extension publication coming out here pretty quick that really kind of digs in a little bit deeper than that. So I think I covered those two items sufficiently.
Well, thank you. I would think in terms of just as a real management issue in situations where one homeowner would replace with zoysia grass in a community, but the neighbor still has St. Augustine grass because their lawn hasn't been affected, that the mowing height issue in that transition in the community would be a real problem, because, again, time is everything when people have contracts, and to stop and be changing mowing heights, slows the process down.
It does in a big way. And the other thing is that, if you're mowing, those that are having really good success with zoysia grass lawns, they're not using those 60-inch deck mowers anymore. They're bringing that cut narrower, because again, you're bringing that high to cut down. If you're trying to mow something at 2 inches and you've got a 60-inch mower and you're going at Mach 6, like a lot of, mowing people do, that deck is out there swinging back and forth. And so you're scalping, the edges of the decks. And so the margin of error, as you bring that high to cut down, if that deck gets too big, it's out there flopping around and you'll dig holes in a hurry. So that it's just different. And zoysia is beautiful. Boy, when it's good, it's good. And like I said, when it's bad, it